सत्यं वसुधिया वसु स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवा भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवान् स्वस्तनुभिर्व्यसेमहि देवहितं यदायुः ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति।
अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुः गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री gurave namah. I welcome all of you to the panel discussion of the book, the wonderful book written by Rajiv Malhotra, The Battle for Sanskrit. This is really, being from Sanskrit Center, I was very happy to see this book. This is our book actually. It is completely about various problems of Sanskrit, how Western scholars' perception and what type of replace Rajiv Malhotra has given. Everything is here. This book contains so many very, very interesting discussion chapters. Lot of injustice has been done to Sanskrit, in my opinion, in India and also elsewhere. There are many misconceptions on Sanskrit language, and particularly the prologue, whatever he expressed on Sanskrit, his views, which are very much contradicting, and also which is not according to the tradition of Sanskrit language and which is not acceptable to the Sanskrit scholars. All these things are preserved in this book.
Thank you, Professor Rao and the Student Union for inviting me. I'm indeed very honored that my book is going to be discussed. I've worked very hard at it, and I worked not to try and topple or defeat or offend any opponent, but to wake up our own Sanskrit scholars who now have to take this up and do a better job than I can and take it further than I can. So the book is framed as a discussion between insiders and outsiders of our tradition. It raises some issues about the outsiders, their interpretations, and gives the insider response. But the purpose of this book is really to wake up the insiders from their silos and isolation and give responses to the outsiders. So my part of the contribution is to put the light on some red flags concerning the outsiders' interpretations, and then request more insiders to join in this exercise. So each chapter of the book is an analysis, a Purva Paksh and Uttar Paksh of what is going on in the world of Indology. A lot of people have asked me, why does it matter to us? It matters to us because we are so colonized that whether we know it consciously or not, much of what we think about ourselves, our own heritage, our own Sanskrit and our own Sanskriti, actually it's been interpreted elsewhere and taught to us. So we've downloaded these apps into our brain, and that's how we are running. For instance, the whole Aryan invasion theory never existed till 1800. There was no concept of a Dravidian people and Aryan people until the 1800s, early mid-1800s. And then, one person, Max Miller starts the Aryan invasion theory, and Robert Caldwell the Dravidian theory, and now 150 years ago, 150 years later, this is part of our life. So it does matter. You can say something similar about the caste system. Lord Risley's role in defining what is today's version of the caste system. Before that, we had something called Jati and Varna, which was not exactly the same thing. So we know these things do matter. And I could go on with a number of examples of things taken for granted, our history, our chronology, many, many things are not as per our tradition, but as reinterpreted by the Western Orientalists and Indologists. So it does matter. And in this book, as my prototype, I've picked the individual and individuals who I consider to be the most powerful, most influential Indologists today, having the maximum influence in India. So do not think that I'm criticizing people that, influence Westerners. Most Americans have never heard of these people. Most Americans haven't. But most of the American academic scholars never heard of these people. Their entire reputation, power, clout is because people in India bend over backwards, go running around adopting what they have written, giving them Padam Shri, Padam Bhushan, millions of dollars of grants, appoint them here and there as the experts. So they have become the experts on Indian civilization as per Indians. As per Indians. You won't find such similar status given to some American concerning Chinese civilization as per the Chinese themselves. You won't find Japanese adopting some American and saying that is the final word on Japanese civilization. Or the Arabs saying that this particular fellow at Harvard knows the ultimate about Islamic studies or Arab studies. You won't find that. Indian civilization is the only among the major ones where the insiders are bending over backward and very grateful to and very obliged that some outsider is studying us and telling us what we didn't ourselves know. So this is the inferiority complex problem that we have. Hence, deconstructing what they have done, giving an answer to it becomes very important. And it's not some guy sitting in America, diaspora, and he has a problem with some people there. It's nothing to do with that. It's me concerned that people in India just aren't able to give a response. This kind of work that I'm critiquing has been going on for at least 3 decades, and nobody has given a systematic response. So Sheldon Pollock, who is the main person I'm evaluating in this book, whose work, I consider him very learned, very intellectual, very smart, and there's nothing personal about him. It's just that I question many of the basic assumptions he makes. I will come to that in a moment. And when I told him that what bothers me is that nobody has done a critical analysis of his work, he says, I've never stopped them. And he's right. He hasn't stopped anyone, but people just never bothered to do it. So that's the background, that's the situation in which I arrived. The book has lots of material stuff in it, and I've given several talks, and I'll put up all the YouTubes. If you write down your email ID, I hope there's a sign-up sheet here for email IDs. Then I will put you in a list and send you links to various lectures I've given. I'm giving 23 lectures in India with some commonalities, but also each one is different. And that way you'll be able to see what was mentioned in all of them. And that's how I'm covering the scope of this entire book, one part at a time. The point I want to, each time I pick up one point and emphasize, so this being a center also for computer science, computational linguistics, sciences, and so on, I want to pick up a particular point that I've critiqued about what the Western Indologists have written. And that point is, according to them, Sanskrit, why did Sanskrit become important? They quickly rule out any army, military invasion like Romans, going around South Asia, Southeast Asia. That didn't happen. It was voluntarily accepted, but why was it voluntarily accepted? The theory is that it was the most powerful, most important language, most useful language for asserting the king's power. It was the power of the king that had to be expressed, and this was done better in Sanskrit than any other language because of kavya. Kavya is, according to them, primarily a political genre, and this could best be done in Sanskrit. And therefore, kings found it useful to maintain their power and spread their power to adopt this and adopt the various literature and texts because it made the king look powerful. And hence they sponsored the Brahmins to develop this kavya, spread this kavya because it would make the king look powerful. So basically the whole theory of the spread of Sanskrit into what they call the Sanskrit cosmopolis, which is a huge area, for over 1,000 years was a quest for power. It was power-hungry kings that patronized the spread of Sanskrit. And anything to do with spirituality and those sort of things are totally excluded from the reason why Sanskrit became important. Now, why was Sanskrit suitable for the spread of power? So here there is a new word coined by the Indologist that I'm critiquing, and this word is literarization. That's called an extra ra. It's not literization. A literized language means literary. You are able to read and write. You can write English literary, and there are people who are literate. But this is not literizing. This is literarizing. An extra ra, literarizing. So the language becomes literarized when it is infused with certain structures, certain construct that lend themselves for power. So to give you an example, suppose somebody says English is particularly suitable for medicine because it is infused with a lot of medical vocabulary, a lot of medical theories are already part of the language. And so when one medical scientist or doctor uses English, it's very easy to communicate. But another language, some obscure language does not have those structures that are medically important, and so it is not as suitable. That's the kind of analogy. Or if you're a software guy, then if you say that a certain language has a lot of macros in it, then it's suitable for development people, for software developers, because they can use that. Or if you are somebody using a smartphone, you can say a particular platform has more apps. It's not just a platform that is important, but it has more apps. So I can do more things with it. So the Sanskrit, according to them, was infused with power structures. And these power structures were oppression of lower caste by upper caste, that was for power, and women by men, and outsiders like Muslims. When they later came, it became very useful to use Sanskrit and Ramayana because it had structures for projecting hostility towards outsiders. So these kind of mechanisms were very useful because they became part of the Sanskrit language, and therefore the Sanskrit was a useful weapon for political expansion. So Sanskrit was literarized because it had certain constructs in the grammar that were asymmetric, that were oppressive, that were something dominating something else. It had philosophy, Vedic philosophy, which had some of these ideas built into it, which are political, which have to do with elites oppressing non-elites, and various text, itihasas, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and so on. And so the aesthetics of this language are so beautiful. In such a lot of beauty, it's able to hide that it's really exerting power over you. So there's a certain aesthetic way of the elite becoming powerful without other people thinking that this is happening. So they're sort of duped into it. And this quality of Sanskrit is what made it powerful. So this theory I critique on two grounds. Firstly, I say that Sanskrit also was infused with many other qualities. It has the sacredness, it has mathematical precision, which made it important, for linguistics, which made it very important. It had mantra, which a lot of people considered important. It has so many different kinds of shastras, from Jyotish Shastra to all sorts of things that people considered important. And the structures of Sanskrit made it, and Sanskriti, all these sort of Sanskriti ideas and Sanskrit itself were so intertwined that there were multiple reasons for Sanskrit to spread. Maybe politics was one of several reasons, but it cannot be considered the one reason only or the dominant reason for Sanskrit spread. So that's the kind of counter argument I give. I also point out that now we have the English language elite in India. That's not the Sanskrit language elite in India. And this, of course, people don't like to hear, particularly in the social sciences. And therefore, what I've said is that now it is English language, Americanized, which has been infused with certain structures of minorityism, casteism, infused with ideas of breaking India projects, divisiveness, infused with self-hate. So the and the mimicry of the whiteness, the mimicry of the Americans. So today, if you were to take the argument given by Pollock about Sanskrit and its power and how it helped perpetuate an elite, one would take the exact same arguments and apply it to English language and say there is the English elite. They are the ones who go to literary festivals and get awards, and they are the ones who are celebrated as very powerful people on mainstream English media. They are the ones who are the IAS people, IFS people. They are the ones who are writing NCRT books, government policies. So it's the English-speaking elite infused with power structures imported from the West, various ideologies imported from the West, which has created the buzz, the vernacular, which has created the language structure of English. So it is not only English purely for ordering a cup of chai or ordinary mundane talk. It is English loaded with these assumptions, loaded with this kind of ideological vocabulary, loaded with all this kind of history, and all these constructs. So when you are learning English and you study English honors, it's not just learning it as a language. You're being taught how to use these structures. You're being taught literary theory. You're being taught a kind of ideological lens, a drishti, to look at the world around you, to look at text and look at the world around you. So my critique is not that they are wrong. I'm saying that first of all, I'm saying that this business of literarization of Sanskrit was not only should not be appreciated only for its political applications, but many other kinds of things for which Sanskrit was very good. And second point, I think, is what upsets people more, because I tell them that the exact same theory can be applied in the reverse direction. What you have are, the Sheldon Pollocks of the world are spreading the power of a certain kind of elite. They are writing prashastis for their sponsors, and the sponsors are doling out millions of dollars. So there's a certain kind of image and aura and aesthetics of this English-speaking cosmopolis, you might say American English cosmopolis, is spreading into India, and we are all sort of elite part of it. I'm part of it too, and I have no problem acknowledging that. So this is one of the important points that I bring out in this book. I also bring out issues of chronology, which I hope the other speakers will raise, will address, Professor Rao and Konrad Elst. I raise questions about whether the claim is correct the other party is making, that the Buddhist tradition was anti-Vedic. I question that, and whether the claim is valid that it is Buddhists who transform Sanskrit into a language that could be used for pragmatic purposes, and introduce writing, and allowed Indians to become progress-oriented, because before that, allegedly, Indians did not have progress. I also question the decoupling of Kavya from Vedas. That is Devpriya's specialty. So I hope Devpriya will say something on that, because a very, very strong claim is being made that Kavya is sort of a secular thing for political goals. That's a very strong statement, but it's being made over and over again. And the whole enterprise of Sanskrit and Sanskriti and Sanskrit texts has survived and thrived because it is very good for social oppression. So it's kind of, using my terms, it's like a weapon of mass destruction. Sanskrit and Sanskriti are a weapon of WMD, intellectual WMD. So it's easy to sell this to another king in Cambodia or Thailand or wherever, because you could say this is a WMD. If you buy this and adopt it in your kingdom, you can become very powerful. So it's all about power, hunger, oppression of other people that has made this successful. The lens being used by Western Indology, they are calling it political philology. It's not just philology. Philology is okay. Everybody does philology, which is a study of texts. But political philology, they say, is looking for political motives in the text. What is the political motive in the Ramayana? What is the political motive in a Veda mantra? Who is being oppressed by whom? What is the political motive of Mahabharata? So it's all postmodernism projected back to interpret, political oppression and exploitation and so on. It's part of this breaking up of everybody's grand narrative. It's part of that. It's part of that project. So the political philology is the device being used for analysis and understanding, reinterpreting. And then there is another device that goes with it called liberation philology, which is then to make interventions to cure the problems, in human rights interventions to cure the problems of an abusive society. So that's what Sanskrit studies, Sanskriti, have turned into. Now, when they say revival, our people are so happy because they say, but so-and-so was saying we revive it. So then I quote them, okay, but their idea of revival, they've said, is to look for such oppression. It's a revival by scholars to study it in a new way than it was studied in the past. Revive it so you can look for such oppressive elements in it, and then you can remove those elements in order to liberate the Indian people from their own baggage, from their own Sanskriti. So it's almost like saying Sanskrit has to be decoupled and deprogrammed and kind of relieved of Sanskriti. You have to take the civilizational, the cultural, the philosophical aspects out of it, kind of secularize it, and then it's safe for consumption. So that's in a nutshell what I'm writing about. I would love to now hear other comments, and then we'll throw it open for question answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rajiv Malhotra ji. Rajiv Malhotra ji has touched various topics in his books, in this book, which you can see here, The Battle for Sanskrit. Some of the very, very interesting topics he has touched. Declaring Sanskrit dead and Sanskriti non-existent. This is one chapter. So, even Pollock wrote an article that the death of Sanskrit language. And also many consider, even in India, that Sanskrit is a dead language. So all these things are thoroughly discussed in this. And for your kind information, I will tell that, let me explain that Sanskrit is not at all dead, it is just ignorance. We very much use it, and thousands of people in India are using it and speaking in day-to-day life also. We also speak always in Sanskrit. And also Sanskriti is non-existing, means it is not at all available. India's culture has disappeared. That is what the concept, that also was discussed thoroughly. And many other topics like that, politicizing the history of Sanskrit and vernaculars. The history of Sanskrit was politicized. That was discussed in this topic, in this chapter. So we have such about the Ramayana also. Ramayana framed as socially irresponsible. So about the Ramayana, there are so many discussions. Again, misunderstandings about the Ramayana. Ramayana we consider as Adikavya, the first poem in Sanskrit literature. So we say in Sanskrit that Jati Jagati Valmikau Kaviritya Vida Bhavat. When Valmiki has taken birth on the earth, then the word came, Kavi word came. Until then there was no the word Kavi at all. Because we needed, you see, when we have that person, we needed a word also, then Kavi word has come. And then the dual number of the Kavi word has come when Vyasa has come. So like that, we have so much value, and there is so much, because if you read Ramayana, then you understand directly. Without reading original Ramayana, there are so many criticisms and all answers are given in this. So in this way, it's very interesting, and he explained about his book and his concept also, how he is trying to give the inspiration and also an outlook, a way actually how Indologists in India should think about these problems. Simply we are just studying, but we have so many problems also. So now I also request Professor Kionard Elst who is a noted Indologist from Belgium. I request him to speak on the one of the chapters of this book.
Yeah. Well, first of all, a little correction. You see, I'm honored to be called Professor Elst, maybe one day, but right now I am not professor. And thereby hangs a tale. Precisely the current represented here by Sheldon Pollock is fairly responsible for blocking my access to the academic system. You see, at the time after I graduated, there was the Ayodhya affair in India. And so I took a stand on that, on the Hindu side, or rather on the scientific side, because asserting that there was a Hindu temple there, displaced by the mosque, is simply a fact of history. And so all real historians should have said that. They said the opposite. And Sheldon Pollock himself has taken the Ayodhya controversy at the time as the reason for his own research into the Ramayana and trying to prove that it was inherently oppressive. So he is one of the people who now really should apologize to the public for asserting something that turned out not to be true. In fact, at that time, we already knew enough about it. We had already enough evidence to be sure that there was a temple there. But if there was any doubt, now we certainly know. We have the excavations, we have found the foundations of the temple. So not only to Sheldon Pollock, but to Romuald Thapar and so on, it really is only proper that they apologize. Now, one chapter in this book that has very much caught my attention is the one on Buddhism. You may not sufficiently realize it, but Buddhism has been turned into a mighty weapon against Hinduism. Like you see when Hindus say, oh, Muslims have destroyed so many temples and so on, then pat comes the answer, but Hindus have also destroyed Buddhist temples and Nalanda University and so on. That's not true, but it's a very common story, and Hindus are often not ready to respond to it. Now, one thing that the Pollock school asserts is that the Buddha was a social revolutionary. I don't think he invented that. It already started in the 19th century when European scholars started seeing the Buddha a bit like Jesus vis-a-vis Judaism. Jesus was born as a Jew, but then he started something, at least according to the gospel, because we don't know how true all this is, but according to the gospel, he started something new. He threw away Jewish law, though at some point he says that he came to fulfill Jewish law anyway, but Christianity as it developed, especially since St. Paul, dropped many Jewish things and became a new religion. And so in this same sense, they took the Buddha as starting something new. In fact, if you read the life of the Buddha in the original sources, you do not find any moment at which the Buddha breaks with Hinduism, or with, the term Hinduism didn't exist yet, but that he breaks with whatever traditions existed around him. But so he was construed then in the fashionable ideas that came up in the 19th century, that became very fashionable in the 20th century, namely egalitarianism especially. And so he came to break the oppressive caste system and bring egalitarianism. Now, the truth is that the Buddha was an elitist par excellence. Of course, by his background already, he was the son of the president for life of the Shakya Republic. He was a member of the Senate of the Shakya Republic. He was a Kshatriya, an upper caste person. He called his teachings Arya, and many Hindus make a big effort to prove that this means noble. Well, yes, but in the context of the Buddha, it still retains something of the ancient meaning of upper caste, of part of the Vedic culture You know, the upper castes were given the Vedic initiation with Upanayana. And so that is still there. Also his physique, you know, he is described as being very tall and very white-skinned relative to the average in Bihar where he came from. So that is not exactly the stereotype of a tribal, of a so-called native, as against the so-called Aryan invaders. So we find very little of that social revolutionary thing, especially if we look at what he was about. You see, he was teaching a spiritual path, a specific system of meditation. Now, if you want to do meditation, if you want to reach liberation, then one thing not to do is to start a social movement. Because, you see, he strongly warns against worldly attachments, worldly desires, and so on. But there, at least, some people manage to fulfill their desires. Many people dream of becoming rich. Some people also do become rich. You know, it can be done, you know, not in every case, but some people do it. But, you know, if you want to reform society, if you want to create a utopia, that's a far, far, far bigger job. You see, the rest of your life you'll be doing nothing but that. You can forget about your spiritual path. So, you see, if you do history like these people, like the Pollock School, for instance, like the neo-Ambedkarites in India do, you know, you project modern concerns, modern egalitarianism onto ancient figures like the Buddha, and then you just have bad history. You have propaganda. You see? And so, you know, in creating his spiritual path, the Buddha mostly draws from whatever he found around him. You see, he had two yoga teachers, you know, who taught him all kinds of techniques. And of course, at some point, he left them and he wanted to do better. You see, but that is normal. You see, in Hindu history, you have many of these cases. And, you know, you are free to, you know, you don't stay a pupil forever. At some point, you know, you find your own way. And this is normal, this is permitted. Richard Gombrich, a typical anti-Hindu scholar of Buddhism, you see, who essentially assumes that Hinduism bad, Buddhism good. You know, that's the very short formula for this line of scholarship. You know, even though he is anti-Hindu, he nevertheless documents that the Buddha several times quotes the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And of course, you see, when Buddha gave sermons, you know, it didn't come with footnotes. You know, he didn't say, oh, you know, this is taken from chapter so many and verse so many from the Upanishad. But nevertheless, the text is there. It's literally the same thing as in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And so, you know, this is not quite revolutionary. Well, did I do that?
So what's going to happen?
So, you know, some more physical, more tangible examples of the continuity between the Buddha and preceding spirituality is, for example, the treatment of the Vedic gods. You see, some Vedic gods, like Indra, have fallen into disuse among Hindus. Well, not in Buddhism. You know, in faraway Japan, you find Buddhist temples where Indra is worshipped. Or, you know, in practically every Japanese village, you find Saraswati being worshipped. Benzai Ten. You know, she's part of a system of the 12 solar gods, the 12 Adityas. And so they are worshipped. They were taken along by the Buddhists. The Rama story has been exported. Oh, and important. You know, it is said that, you know, Buddhism good, Rama bad. Especially Pollock precisely says that. Now, it is the Buddha himself. It's not the Vishwa Hindu Parishad or something. No, it is the Buddha himself who says that he was a reincarnation of Rama. You see? Later some, Puranic authors created the system of they're both incarnations of Vishnu. Okay, that may be a Hindu innovation, but the very fact that he is integrated in the existing system with Rama, you see, that is the Buddha's own contribution. So the Rama story was exported by Buddhists to Tibet and so on. Or about Indra, the Vajra. The Vajra is Indra's weapon, the lightning. Now the Vajra has become a standard symbol of Tibetan Buddhism, as you know. And so many of the things the Buddha teaches, that characterize Buddhism, are common in Hinduism and existed earlier, like asceticism, the value of non-desire is already in the Upanishads, the teaching of reincarnation, of course. And we see reincarnation appears in the Upanishads. It is said explicitly that this is a new doctrine. That's a doctrine of the Kshatriyas specifically. And so it's no coincidence that two sects in which reincarnation is absolutely central, namely Buddhism and Jainism, were both founded by Kshatriyas. Oh, and about Kshatriyas, one more thing. When the Buddha dies, he is cremated, and they have his ashes. What to do with the ashes? And so there are 8 different cities that claim his ashes, and ultimately they each get one part. Now, in their claim on the ashes, they say explicitly, we, the elite of this city, we are Kshatriyas, he was a Kshatriya, therefore we have a right to these ashes. So you see, after the Buddha had been teaching for 45 years, in a Buddhist context par excellence, these people, claim their elitist status, their caste. So you see, clearly, if the Buddha had taught the opposite, that would have been deemed inappropriate. People wouldn't have been, they might have had the same desire, but they would have formulated it differently. So, and one final example, you recently have heard in the news of a terrorist attack in Bangkok, where the Phrom temple was attacked. And Phrom is simply the local pronunciation of Brahma. You see, another Vedic god that has been carried along with Buddhism. So, and one more example, a very different kind of example. You see, Buddhism is deemed good, and everything that's good in Hinduism has been borrowed from Buddhism. You see, before the Buddha there was nothing much. Then the Buddha came, and out of the blue he invented everything nice, or his followers did, and then Hindus started taking those things over. Now, we already mentioned Nalanda University. There were earlier universities, but it is very often said and assumed that even by Hindus it is said that, you see, the university as an institution is a Buddhist invention. No, that is not true. In the Buddhist sources themselves, we find that 2 contemporaries of the Buddha, of about the same age, King Prasenadi and military general Bandhula, knew each other because they studied together in Takshashila University. Now, the Buddha himself at that age was too young to have founded that university. Okay, so the university existed before him. In fact, this was more or less the time, they assume, of Panini, who was teaching there at that university. So, you see, the university is a Hindu institution. And the Buddhists adopted that institution because it was there and because they were part of Hindu society. You see, there is never the Buddha or anyone after him until Ambedkar in 1956 who breaks with Hinduism in order to become a Buddhist. So it is very important to say, as against the Pollock school, that, you see, there is a complete continuity between Buddhism and Hinduism. Thank you.
Now let me also speak one chapter of the book, The Battle for Sanskrit. That is about the same topic actually, which now the Belgian professor was speaking about the Buddhism actually. Sheldon Pollock, how in his book, he wrote a book, Sheldon Pollock, he wrote a book named The Language of the Gods in the World of Men. In his book, he interpreted Buddhism as contradicting to Vedic Dharma. This is what actually he wrote and he discussed, Rajiv Malhotra has discussed in his book. Now, on this chapter, I have some points and I'm speaking on this chapter. What actually Sharon Pollock tried to do in his book, that he divides Vedic tradition and Buddhic tradition as mutually opposing traditions. He said that Buddhists challenged the authority of the Vedic tradition by by opposing this as animal sacrifices. But we have to remember that Vedic and Buddhist traditions are not contradicting each other. Animal sacrifices, of course, they have opposed, and many of them, not only Buddhists, even Charvakas has opposed animal sacrifice. But it doesn't mean that Buddhism came only to contradict the Vedic religion, not like that. Because Buddha, when Buddha was born, he was very much Vedic, he was born in Vedic tradition. Now tell me in which tradition he was born otherwise. He was very much born in Vedic tradition. We all say that he was a Kshatriya. Kshatriya, in which tradition this Kshatriya was there? Only in Vedic tradition. So he was born as Vedic, in Vedic tradition, and therefore it is not contradicting at all. That is my point, actually. My argument is Buddhism is not contradicting. Why you are again and again saying that Buddhism is contradicting to Vedic religion, and this is not correct. Buddhism follows, actually, if you read Buddhism, you will understand that Buddhism follows the Jnana, Karma, Bhakti theories. You all find these three theories in Buddhist literature. Actually, if you study Buddhism, because I have studied Buddhism, I'm postgraduated in Pali, not only in Sanskrit, I did research also. After studying this Pali literature and also Mahayana Buddhism, I always thinking that why actually people are contradicting each other, which is not at all real, and they are not contradicting. Because actually, if you study Buddhist literature, what he did is Buddha emphasized on yoga. Actually, he continued the yogic tradition in his Buddhist literature. He did nothing else that only continuing and researching and working on yogic tradition, yoga actually. How now you say how he is working on yoga? Because yoga means actually, you see what Patanjali says in Yoga Darshana, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga Darshana says about the mind only. And Buddha always speaks about the mind. Dhammapada starts with the verse mind. Mano pubbangama dhamma, mano pubba manomaya, manasache paduttena bhasativa karotiva tatonam dukkhamanmeti. And not only that, later in Khuddaka Nikaya also, in Digha Nikaya, everywhere Buddha you will find that he always Ashtanga Marga also. He always focuses on the mind. You control your mind, he says. There are several gathas and several passages. I am not going to repeat all these things. But that is why I say that what he said. And this yoga, this mind, researching on mind and controlling on mind, and this is what actually Vedic literature, Vedas also are saying same thing. You see, in Rig Veda you find this Manas Sukta, there Tan Me Manas Shiva Sankalpa Vastu. So this is what in Vedic mantra. The same thing Buddha also is saying. Mano Pubbangama Dhamma. In this way, if you think that this is not at all contradicting, and in later Mahayana Buddhism, if you see, there is a Yogacara school in Mahayana Buddhism. It is completely based on mind study only. They are called a mind-only theorists. They say only mind is existing, nothing else is existing. That's what their theory. So this is always I am confusing in what way Sanskrit language was misunderstood, Sanskrit literature was misunderstood in India and also everywhere. Why actually only on Sanskrit always attacks on Sanskrit and misunderstanding on Sanskrit literature? Why misunderstanding Buddhism also? Why you are not properly understanding perfectly? You are not understanding. This is the problem, one of the problems in the field of Indology. And this problem is being created by some scholars like Sheldon Pollock, I think. That's why he criticized and also he researched on his books, Rajiv Malhotra ji. And we have to do also that. And what Sheldon Pollock says that Buddhism only brought the literature in India. Means there was no writing style in Sanskrit, and due to before Buddhism, actually there were only Vedic mantras. Brahmins used to, before Buddha, not just meaning. He said that only meaningless chantings of the Vedic mantras were existing. These poems and creative writing was not there in India, which was introduced by Buddhism, which is not at all correct. And let us think that before Buddha, what was there in India? Do you think that this is just meaningless chantings of the Vedas were there? It's not at all correct. It is not correct that Vedic sages were only fire worshippers. He said that only fire worshippers. They were just used to fire only, that nothing else. Buddhism brought the creativity. With the creative literature, everything has. It is not correct. See the Vedas once. Did you study the Veda? If you see the Veda, you will find many philosophical, cosmological discussions. For example, Asyavamiya Sukta and Nasadiya Sukta and various suktas of Rig Veda. You know what is the matter of the Asyavamiya Sukta and Nasadiya Sukta? They discussed how this creation actually originated. Nasadasi, Sadasi. You see, these profound discussions have taken place in Vedas. Then how you say that, how Sheldon Pollock said that only repeated chantings were there and Buddhism brought this, this is not correct. And we have profound philosophical discussions, not only in Vedas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, Upanishads are known for these discussions. Upanishads are before the Buddha. And he also said that this writing and everything, civilization and this creative writing, everything came from by the foreign Kushans and Shakas. And because they came from Central Asia and they have introduced all these writing system and skills and all that, which is not correct again. Before that only, as we can find in Vedic literature, we have so much science. In Chandogya Upanishad also we can find that Ekayevahu Rasadeva Agra Asit, Ekameva Dvitiyam, Tasma Rasatas Sanjayate. All these things are, it's full of Vedic literature, is full of profound discussions of philosophy. The relation of Buddha with the prior profound knowledge of Vedic sages can be proved in many ways, in various manners. Buddha was highly influenced by Sankhya philosophy, actually. And this Sankhya philosophy is not just coming just itself. Sankhya philosophy is the development of the... Sankhya philosophy was basically found in Upanishads. And later on it became Sankhya philosophy, and that was influenced, that has influenced Buddha. And Buddha was highly, because if you see the Buddha Darshana and Sankhya philosophy, both are very similar. Both are based on same principles. Sankhya also says, you see, these three worlds are, everything is full of sorrow, misery, pain, everything. Dukkhatrayabhigata. Buddha also starts from dukkha only. So in this way, we have so much similarity between Sankhya and Buddha. Sankhya was pre-existing before Buddha, and Sankhya is because it just came from Upanishads. And Buddha's teacher was there. He studied Buddha, because Buddha, when he came, he left his palace, and all of a sudden he could not become the great scholar. You see, he studied with various people. He had two teachers, Arada Kalama and Udrak Ramaputra. And Arada Kalama was a great master of Sankhya, and he studied the Sankhya system. That is why Buddha learned from him. And in that way, Buddha was very much part of Vedic tradition. Pollock claims that Ramayana was composed by Valmiki based on the Jataka tales. This is very much unacceptable, because in Jataka, I also studied that in Jataka tales, there is one Jataka, Dasharatha Jataka. There is a small story actually. It's not very detailed, very brief story, but story is very different from Ramayana. There, Sita is the sister of Rama, and all such things are described. And what Pollock says that entire Ramayana, which is Adi Kavya, you see about Ramayana, it is said that Yavas Thasyanti Giraya, Yavat Vindhya Himachalau, Tavat Ramayani Katha Lokeshu Pracharishyati. As long as Himalayas are existing, and as long as Vindhya and this mountain is existing, so long Ramayana Katha continues. This is true also. You see, Ramayana is still continuing, ever interesting story. We have seen several movies and several serials, but still we are interested to know something, watch and see Ramayana story. Because that is the greatness of Ramayana. And he is such a great poem, Ramayana, which is Adi Kavya. How that great Indologist of America, he says that it is just based on Dasharatha Jataka, small. It is not at all acceptable. And he says that, in fact, he says that actually Ramayana, the story of Rama is nothing but the just imitation of Buddha's story. Because they have imitated Buddha. And in order to defend his arguments, he delayed the dates of Ramayana. Because what he said that Ramayana was composed after Buddha. This is great injustice. But he could not supply the sufficient proofs for that. In Ramayana, if you see the Ramayana, you will never see the mention of Bauddha or Jaina or Buddhists or Jains, anything, nothing else.
Right.
Nothing is found in Ramayana. If it is after Buddha, there should be some mention of Ramayana, Buddha and Jaina, something, but you never find any mention of Buddhists or Buddha or Jains or Jaina or anything. So that is quite evident that Ramayana was written earlier than, much more before than Buddhism. And he delayed the date of Ramayana, and then he says that, and we cannot accept that because he could not give the proofs, but we can give the proofs. We can give the evidences. Because, you see in Ramayana, Kaushambi, Kanyakubja, Kampilya towns were mentioned, but not the Pataliputra. Because Pataliputra town was developed in BC 380 during the regime of Kalashoka. So it is quite evident that is why the Pataliputra was not mentioned in Ramayana. These ancient towns are mentioned very much, Kaushambi, Kanyakubja, Kampilya. And also in Ramayana, Ayodhya was not named as Saketa. Because Saketa was named, Saketa is given to Ayodhya only by Buddhists. So in Buddhist literature, in Jatakas, you will find this name Saketa, but not in Ramayana. So this is another evidence. And he says that, and also he says that Panini also after Buddha, he says.
Yes, very, very clearly.
And however, this is not just Pollock's theory. There are many other Western scholars before him. German scholar Winter Nietzsche, Keith and others have stated that Ramayana was composed after Buddha and Panini is after Buddha. But many Western scholars and Indian scholars have not accepted this view. Among them are the Macdonald, Jacobi, are very important. They did not accept Ramayana because they said Ramayana has composed much more earlier than Buddhism. And Panini, there is one famous scholar, Goldstucker. He said that Panini belongs to 8th century BC. So therefore, Pollock's theory that Panini came afterwards, because he tried to convince it through various arguments, because Panini used the Yavana word, Yavana. Yavana means actually Greeks. It is referred to Greek because Yavana, the ones Panini uses Yavana means, that means Panini's Ashtajayi was written only after Alexander's invasion. That's what his conclusion. But before Alexander's invasion, Panini already knows about the Yavanas. Alexander's invasion was not needed for the Yavana's knowledge of Panini. Because Panini was born in Attak, in present Afghanistan and Pakistan area. So there, Yavanas used to come at that time. That's why he knows about Yavanas already before Alexander. Therefore, he used Yavana word. So in this way, this literature has been misunderstood, and this is what I find actually. This is a indirect attack on our culture and our language. They want to prove that, you see, Sanskrit is not very ancient. Buddhism is contradicting to Vedic religion. And Pali is, again, there is another problem with the Pali. People immediately, because I studied Pali, I am teaching also in our center Pali, people immediately ask if Pali is ancient or Sanskrit is ancient. Pali is older. This is the question. Everybody asks. This became habit of the, I immediately say that don't ask this question. Whichever may be ancient, both are ancient languages. First you try to learn any one language first. Before learning, what they say, Pali pehle, Sanskrit pehle. They ask. So, I confuse actually, because abhi tak humko bhi pata nahi hai, kaun sa holder hai. So first you learn any one language at least. Because both languages are great languages. Both languages contain great literature. I tell you really. You must read Pali literature. It is a storehouse of our Indian history. Prakrit literature, storehouse of Indian history, culture, traditions. Without learning, without trying to learn, people always try to. We never ask that any other science disciplines, chemistry is first or physics is first. We never ask like that. But they ask always this Pali is first or Sanskrit. And immediately they put Sanskrit is dead or alive. So all these questions are coming only on these subjects because they became habituated, because we are habituated with such researches, Pollock's researches. And there are many other scholars also. So what I request all friends and also academicians, please try to read, if you have any time, try to learn these languages. Really, I am not just emphasizing because I studied Sanskrit. Any scholar, any academician, once he tries to learn, he enters into this language, he knows something about the literature, he never goes back from this literature, because such a great intellectual genius, everything is there. And also, in Sanskrit literature, everything is there. And also people don't consider Sanskrit is not just language. You see, recently I put one school proposal for our center. People thought that, oh, it's just a language, you want to consider school? Not like that, actually. It's not just language. Sanskrit was the medium of a lot of science and literature. And you see, there is one proverb in Sanskrit, kati kavayaha, kati kritayaha, kati nashtaha, kati labdhaha. So much literature has been destroyed, disappeared. Still, we have at least 2 lakhs Sanskrit books are existing in Sanskrit. In spite of all this destruction, disappearance, you see, when nations divided, a lot of literature has gone. And when Nalanda library was burned, so much literature was burned. And in spite of that, K.T. Ganapati Shastri recently, he wrote a book that still we have at least 5 lakhs manuscripts are available in Sanskrit, he wrote. Now still in Tibet and China, also Tibet, particularly Tibet and monasteries, unexplored monasteries are there, still there may be possibility of Sanskrit because there is another version again. Lot of literature is available in Chinese and Tibetan languages. Originals are Sanskrit, but only originals have lost and only translations are available. You ask any Chinese professor, he will tell. So, such a vast literature it is. And that's why it's not just language. We have so much science in it. We have astrology. We have great grammar. And also we have Ayurveda history. So much literature, Ayurveda literature. And we have physics, we have chemistry. Everything was there in, you see, Sanskrit. These sciences were not divided in ancient India. Everything was there in one single book. So that is why we have universities, not just schools. We are asking for school, but there are universities of Sanskrit. You see, at least 15 universities are there on Sanskrit in India now. Why university on language? You can just imagine, why can there be any university on language? For language, one language course is enough. Why there are university? Because Sanskrit is not just language, it contains lot of science, literature, so much. Therefore, we need big institutions for that. Such a vast literature, such a great Sanskrit was misunderstood by Westerns and also by Indians also, because we are not trying to learn it. So I am very happy because Rajiv Malhotra, I don't know so much, because I know, but in spite of that, because of his writings, because of his book, such stimulation he has given to us, and we had to think about these problems. We should try to understand these problems in a proper manner, and we should understand that these are not contradicting. Buddhism and Vedic religion is not contradicting. Sanskrit is a great, you should understand that. These problems are very positively discussed in this book, and thank you for giving this opportunity.
You want to invite the speaker?
Now, I would like to invite my colleague, Professor Girishnath Jha, to speak on the language. Actually, his subject is linguistics and computational linguistics. He will deal with this subject.
Thank you, JNU Student Union, and thanks to Rajiv for giving me this opportunity here. And I have known Rajiv for quite a few years now. We have worked together on some of the seminars in US, and there are publications which have come out. And I'm really thankful to JNUSU for organizing this event here, because the students have to be aware of the conspiracies happening everywhere against what is Sanskrit, what is India. Sanskrit has been at a very receiving end, actually, in India, in post-independence India, and after 19th century, when the Western Indologists created a fashionable branch of study called Sanskritic Indology everywhere in the West, and so many departments open. And initially, it appeared that probably they're doing it with right purpose. And later on, Rajiv notes in his book that we have to study someone if we want to destroy him or her. So that could have been the real motive. Sanskritic studies have suffered in the age of Macaulay-inspired education in India. So it has been a unfairly criticized language and unfairly represented language, especially in India. More than in the West, in India, we have represented Sanskrit in a much more negative manner, because of mostly of our vote bank politics in the post-independent India that has harmed Sanskrit more than it has harmed India, actually. And in the West, there has been a negative propaganda in partnership with the Desi intellectuals. And, well, I'm included in that. And so I'm critiquing myself. And in that partnership, we create a very negative and disrespectful image of Sanskrit. And we do that on one hand. On other hand, we secretly research the fundamental text of Sanskrit to create new ideas and to bring new ideas out of that. And now, Sanskrit is the language with highest number of universities, relatively less favored in schools. Why do we not include or encourage Sanskrit in schools? Do we not want students to join colleges and universities? So you see the controversy of Sanskrit versus German and all that. And our kids are progressively being exposed to global content and propaganda in our living rooms. I was watching a television program. Actually, I was working on my laptop. My kid was watching a television program, a Japanese serial, translated in Hindi. And there were three kids talking to each other. One kid says to other, if you do my work, I'll give you an award. Or reward, I'll reward you. The third kid asks, what will be the reward? He says, this kid's wife. So you can reward someone with someone's wife in a foreign culture, not in India. So if kids continue to watch such things in our living rooms, we don't know what kind of citizens we are going to get tomorrow. So this is a very serious problem. Well, in one estimate, 95% of Sanskrit texts are scientific texts. That includes philosophy. But Sanskrit is linked to religion and esoteric practices. And our students in Sanskrit Center are working actually very closely with scientists to do comparative research. We have brightest of traditional scholars, but they can't communicate in the language and vocabulary that the world understands. So we allow the Westerners to study us, critique us, and we don't study them. And Rajiv would like us to study them equally well and critique on them. We have largest number of manuscripts that any civilization has produced. There's one rough estimate, 30 million still waiting to be digitized. But these manuscripts are in better condition and more accessible if they are in foreign country. Well, our students were looking for manuscripts. We found some manuscripts in very good condition in Bangladesh and in Pakistan and in Germany, in Nepal, but not in India. So despite of so much of resources in the country now, we are still a very poor caretaker of our own resources. And that gives more opportunity to outsiders to fish in the troubles. Sanskrit can have opportunities in virtually every field of study, but a lack of proper direction pins it down. And Sanskrit Commission reports, if you want to see the first Sanskrit Commission report, you will get an idea of what I'm saying. Many wonders of modern sciences have sources in Sanskrit, but credit generally goes to the West. Oldest language in the Indo-European family, but it does not get the credit. And if you read Conrad's work and papers, you will be more willing to believe that yes, the Sanskrit actually belonged to this country and it probably went outside from here. Now they constructed a proto-Indo-European fiction to prove a point that the Sanskrit came from the West to India. So the two basic topics that I'm going to briefly touch upon that is very important in Rajiv's book. The Sanskrit relationship with its vernaculars and other Indian languages. Now, it's very clear, Panini calls his language as Bhasha. Bhasha is the ordinarily spoken language. As my mother tongue would be Maithili, that's Maithili is Bhasha for me. When the language surveyors go to villages asking for which language you speak, people say, I speak Bhasha. This is the language I speak. Right? Unless you have more than one language in the region, you would just call it Bhasha. You'll not name it A, B, or C. So Panini's language is Bhasha. He writes a grammar for the language, and that language gets Sanskritized, and is called Sanskrit afterwards, and becomes the main carrier of the intellectual tradition in the country. That's pretty much it. And other languages have drawn heavily from Sanskrit, as we today draw from the dominant language in our region. But there's something very unusual about Sanskrit. That after Panini's grammar, Sanskrit kind of resisted changes. And that doesn't mean to say that Sanskrit got fossilized or Sanskrit got artificialized, but there was the intellectuals all over the country, they preferred a much more standard language so that they could write and be understood all over the country. If I wrote in standard Sanskrit, I would be understood in South India, in the Western India, in Eastern India, Northern India. If I wrote in a regional variety of Sanskrit, one of the Prakrit or one of the Pali languages, I would be understood only in one of the regions. So therefore, when Buddha promoted Pali, when he was talking to villagers in Bihar or elsewhere, he would certainly use a local variety, which was more commonly understood. But when the scholars of Buddhism chose to write Buddhist philosophy in Pali, they were not understood well all over the country, so they chose then to write in Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit, Sanskrit mixed with Pali. Even that was not sufficient. And finally they switched to Sanskrit. The Mahayana Buddhists switched to Sanskrit completely. That clearly indicates the necessity for scholars to choose a language which is clearly understood all over the country. Something English does it today in India, and of course Hindi is becoming a language of that kind progressively. So Sanskrit's importance has to be understood from various perspectives. I bring in the perspective of technology. Well, look at the figures. As per the census of India, we have 14,000 speakers of Sanskrit and 49,000 speakers of Arabic in this country. That also points out to the fallacy of the methods used by the language surveyors in the country. And my rough estimate would be there are 500,000 Sanskrit speakers in the country. There are 17 universities, 150 departments, hundreds of schools. If you count the students, there will be certainly more than 500,000 people who can speak some Sanskrit. No state owns it, so it is a language which is not regional, except Uttaranchal recently gave it some status. But we can have scholars using Sanskrit all over the country. Something similar to English is not owned by any state, but scholars can speak it all over. Mother of most of Indo-Aryan languages, and in my view, the Rebutting is not really a different family. It's part of the same Indic family, which has two major branches, south of India and north of India. And if you combine that, you have 96% people of the country speaking the Sanskritic languages. If you count the number of vocabulary in South Indian languages, Malayalam has as much as 75% vocabulary. That's the youngest Sanskrit language. And the least vocabulary is in Tamil, which is 49%. So you can imagine the kind of impact Sanskrit has had, not only in vocabulary, but also the Sanskriticism, the ism that Sanskrit actually, in terms of literature, culture, philosophy, and sciences, that it has impacted the languages of India all over. The source of India's intellectual, religious, spiritual power, and common source of vocabulary for, of course, Indian languages and many of the European languages. There are hundreds and thousands of vocabularies of Sanskrit in European languages. Source of much of Indian language, literature, art, and culture, and of course, language of religion. And more importantly for me, it has inspired grammar writing in Indian languages. Now, for a computational linguist, I don't need to write grammars of all Indian languages separately from the computer's perspective. So I write a core grammar, which will have certainly the Sanskrit elements, which will be commonly understood by all the grammars, and then we have plugins, say plugin for Tamil, plugin for Malayalam, and Gujarati, etc. But the common core continues to be. And as an example of it, under Microsoft Research, we did research and came up with a common mechanism to tag all Indian languages. So single mechanism can still tag all Indian languages in India. So there is more to connect Indian languages than to divide us. Now, if you look at the scheduled languages, Indo-Aryan languages are there, and there are 4 Dravidian languages, and 3 languages of the Tibeto-Burman and Austroasiatic. And there are scripts, most of the scripts are Brahmi based in India, and only 2 scripts, Persian-Arabic and Persian-Arabic script actually is not Brahmi based. And of course, Roman is not Brahmi based. So there's a major part of India linguistically, and it owes to Sanskrit and Brahmi. So when Palak says Sanskrit is dead, I don't know what he means actually by that. So Sanskrit is multifaceted, multidisciplinary, and useful. Now, in a commercialized India today, we regard things which are useful to us. Sanskrit is useful. It can be commercialized, can be useful to all Indian languages. So from that perspective also, we should retain Sanskrit and promote it. It is not just any other language. It is more than a language. Professor Rao was saying that Sanskrit is not only a language. There are 17 universities only for language. That makes it an enviable language compared to English. English doesn't have 17 universities in England even. So we have a much more powerful language in India. When this German Sanskrit controversy was going on, the German ambassador had invited me for advice. And I told him, I'm rephrasing it in the local dialect, don't take panga with Sanskrit. It is a very powerful language in India. So you really have to be very careful about it. So Sanskrit is useful. It defines India in many ways, more ways than we can even imagine actually. The many ways, if you go to West, India means Sanskrit, and Sanskrit means India to many people. Linguistic and cultural sustenance for other Indian languages. Now, Indian languages, can you imagine an Indian language today without Sanskrit impact, Sanskrit vocabulary? I mean, there are new classical languages in India. They ask them, what makes you a classical language? You examine their literature. You see the themes of Sanskrit. You see themes of Mahabharata. You see themes of Kavya Shastra. All along, all Indian languages. Yoga and Ayurveda, certainly international entities now, fundamental scientific ideas in Sanskrit. And I had a chance to explore one scientific text called Rasayan Sar, the text of chemistry from Banaras area with the University of Massachusetts. And we have translated that book into English, and it's being researched by 2 PhD students at UMass Dartmouth. And we are going to find something very startling regarding nanoparticles as being used as bioenhancers in US. But the sad part is the US is more interested in such explorations than Indian government actually. Fundamental scientific ideas in Sanskrit texts have to be explored further, and then my area, computational linguistics and AI, and you must have probably heard that Sanskrit is very precise and it helps being a computer language. Many people do not know what they are saying, but then yes, Sanskrit is very close to being an artificial language for mechanical purposes, and therefore personally, I don't believe that many people should speak Sanskrit. I take a revolutionary position in my department. Now, because if you start speaking Sanskrit very popularly, it starts to change. And when it starts to change, it behaves like an ordinary language. And then machines don't like such ordinary languages. And we want a very mechanical language where we can express commonsensical knowledge to the machine using a natural language like Sanskrit. So it's a powerful tool for artificial intelligence and computational linguistics. It is more powerful because we can develop technology for Indian languages having a common core. It simplifies technology development, it reduces cost, and less requirement for maintaining the software. So therefore, it is much more useful to me, particularly, e-learning and animation. So we have done animated Jatak Kathas. You can go to my site, sanskrit.jnu, read Jatak Kathas, see if there's something anti-Sanskrit in them or anti-Hindu in them. Buddhism never opposed Hinduism, Professor Rao rightly said, and Rajiv rightly mentions in his book, that in India, these dichotomies don't exist. People are essentially multicultural, and they respect each other. Even Charavakas have been respected all over the country. It's a very essentially a very tolerant society. All the discussion of intolerance in the country actually. So certainly there's a lot that can be done. And briefly, what should be done? Just one of the last slides. Actually, preserve and promote traditional scholarship. That has certainly fallen back. Actually, we haven't given good room to develop a traditional scholarship in the country. Certainly, the Macaulay-inspired education is a big responsibility for that. And we have to preserve and promote our heritage using IT and digital media, because that's what people know today. And we have to translate key Sanskrit texts so that our kids can read original Sanskrit texts and be prepared to answer critiques from people like Sheldon Pollock. Unless they read the original text, they'll not be able to respond to such criticisms from the West. We have to infuse contemporary studies into Sanskrit, certainly, and Sanskrit at all levels in schools, Sanskrit positions in other departments. Now, the scientific department, for example, JNU, a biotechnology researcher can do much better research from our own tradition if he reads or has access to Sanskrit text. So therefore, the Sanskrit teacher over there, he can liaison with such scholars and produce some original research in the country, relying on original text of the country. And so, of course, we have to have a manpower training of Sanskrit scholars. My rough estimate is that there are approximately 10,000 grad students doing Sanskrit studies in the country. So we hope to do training of all of them sometime in near future and be able to turn a tide. So, well, thank you very much. I don't want to actually continue next. Many of you will probably can go to my site and see what we do in JNU. So thank you very much, and I hope there will be some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Girish Nacha, for a very good, attractive PowerPoint presentation. You have explained in detail why the purpose of Sanskrit and other things also. Now, let me invite the last speaker here on the dais, Dr. Devapriya Roy. She did research, PhD from JNU only. And she will not speak on any one part, but the overall, the book of The Battle for Sanskrit, written by Rajiv Malhotra. I invite Dr. Devapriya Roy.
At the outset, I would like to congratulate Rajiv Malhotra for his path-breaking new book, Battle for Sanskrit. It's available outside. I hope you buy it and get it signed by him today, because it's a very important and very interesting book. I'm going to come to some of the issues in a bit, but before that, I have a message to convey to Rajiv ji from Professor Kapil Kapoor. He was supposed to be here today to bless the book and its writer, to share anecdotes of their long friendship, and of course, to make you laugh, because had he been here, he would have, delivered a talk which would have occasioned many laughs. He's unfortunately recovering from a severe bout of illness, and he's been ordered by his doctor to stay at home. So very reluctantly, he has remained away today. But he conveys his best wishes to the author, and he hopes that the author's voice is ever louder. Okay. Now, I'm a little embarrassed to be speaking in this panel because everybody else here has been working in the area of Sanskrit and Sanskrit studies for several decades. I am but a student, and I speak here as a student, and I'm very honored to be here today. Now, I meant to actually talk about the overall importance of this book, not only to Sanskrit studies, but to what I call post-global studies. But because Rajiv ji, when he was talking, he said that he hoped I would say also something about the decoupling of Kavya from Vedas and, in my opinion, from Shastras that Professor Sheldon Pollock has done in his work. And I wanted to share an anecdote in that context. However, I must tell you I'm going to be brief overall so that we have a lot of time for question answers. The reason really why I came to the Natya Shastra, which is what my PhD is on, is very interesting. I came to JNU to do my master's from the Department of English Studies. One of the things that Rajiv ji mentioned, that the task of political philology, it seems, has been to teach all civilizations how to break grand narratives. It is very interesting because in our context, it seemed to me when I read the Natya Shastra that we were breaking our own grand narratives from the get-go. And that's why I always give one example. Many of you from the Sanskrit Center here will probably be familiar with this story from the Natya Shastra. In the first chapter of the Natya Shastra, initially, the whole the theory of drama is built to be the fifth Veda. The moment you say fifth Veda, you confer a certain importance, a certain sacral centrality to a text. Now, it is said that the fifth Veda, Natya, draws from the four other Vedas. So dialogue from Rig Veda, music from Sama Veda, and so on. Now, the first chapter of Natya Shastra then goes on to record the first performance. So here is a text that has been articulated by Brahma to Bharata, who's a rishi, and Bharata and his troop of 100 sons, they put up the first performance ever. The first performance is held on the occasion of Indra's flag festival, and it's held in the open. So all the devas have come and they are part of the audience, and everybody is thrilled with the performance. So all the devas sort of, they give gifts and offerings to the performers. Suddenly, after intermission, after halftime, suddenly they find that one by one the performers begin to faint. And then everyone is very surprised, the audience is very surprised. And then it is found out that this happens because the asuras, who are very unhappy with their portrayal in the play, have sent the Vignas to disrupt the performance. So mind you, this is the first performance. It is backed by an authoritative text, let's say, the fifth Veda, and the very first performance is a flop. This is a fine instance of the puncturing of a grand narrative at the beginning. That is why I always say that, when you move away from so much talk around Sanskrit to the texts, there are these things that you discover which then, they completely change the way you begin to look at the tradition. So this is just one example that I wanted to give and say that the Shastras cannot be decoupled from the Kavyas, and when looked at together, they open up the tradition to a much more rigorous inquiry. So that now, when I was reading Battle for Sanskrit, what I was really impressed with is that here is a book that for the first time challenges something that nobody seems to question, that we have all seemed to take for granted, which is the American age of academics. Now, what post-colonialism did to Indology was to question many of the problems, many of the inbuilt structures of power and inequality that came with the white man translating the texts to the natives. However, it almost seems that because post-colonialism and its hyphenated existence links it to colonialism, it almost seems that post-1947, when we look at knowledge that is being produced elsewhere, we cease to bring these same issues of politics and funding to bear upon this. And that is where Rajiv ji has done great service. I'll just go on to talk about what I mean by this odd and personal coinage, post-global. In our concern with self-definition as a nation, in our critique of Marxist, or alternatively, of nationalist approaches to our history, we have failed to pay serious academic attention to the rise of the American appropriative model that has been a great force in shaping academics in the last few decades. This model has emerged hand in hand with globalization, and through the unique combination of America's soft and hard power, made itself the standard against which everything elsewhere must be measured. Publish or perish, they say in the West. You must have heard that. So recently, during a NAC accreditation at a traditional Ved Vidyalaya, the examiners demanded to know the citation index of the teachers over there who teach the Vedas through the attested oral methods. You know, it's ridiculous, but it's hardly ever called for how ridiculous it is. Unless translated in America by an American scholar, a text, whether a South Korean novel or an ancient Sanskrit kavya, cannot, it would seem, reach a wider global audience. And yet, the violence that the text might suffer in order to become that which a global Western audience might appreciate is a subject of silence and erasures. Even as a globalized labor market helped America get rid of its polluting industries, and its military interventions in other parts of the world kept its military-industrial complex booming, its universities became ivory towers, attracting the best minds from the rest of the world, no doubt facilitated by the salubrious environs that were the result of the first and the might of the petrodollar backed by the latter. What Oxford and Cambridge were to Britain's colonial project, MIT and Harvard and tens of other superb universities became for American neocolonialism. Both descent and ascent were managed through a process of deep and clever interpolation. And yet, this appropriation of all narratives, whether religious or secular, whether in the humanities or the hard sciences, has not been contested in any overarching way. The literature produced from American brand name institutions have not been studied self-reflexively in terms of either funding sources or authenticity. This is very important, and this is where Rajiv Malhotra, with Battle for Sanskrit, has effected a breakthrough in what I call post-global studies. The nexus between power and knowledge has always been a matter of concern, and yet strangely, the gaze is never reversed onto the American academy. I must emphasize that in a free world, it is of course possible for anyone to say anything. But the problem is when this exchange happens only one way. Is it possible for a book that is a trenchant criticism of, say, American history to be written and published in India and effect changes at the highest levels in America? Unfortunately, the answer is a resounding negative. The Western world is completely closed to the idea of delegating ownership of its history and culture to others, while at the same instant taking ownership of everybody else's histories. Elsewhere I have written, that it's almost as though this is a modern Noah's Ark, where the cultures in their original sites all die out because of the dual impact of turbo capitalism and English and globalization. In their sites, these cultures die out and they are preserved in their American cleansed form, what Rajiv ji was saying, in that cleansed, redeemed form in American libraries and laboratories. And this is something that we must resist, this is why this book is so important. You must all read it. And what Rajiv ji does is that he says that this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning, and I think I speak for him when I say that disagreements, agreements, everything to this book will be an addition to this debate. The debate has been opened, and I hope the Sanskrit Center in JNU takes a leading role in this. It is a pity that the battle for Sanskrit is being fought in English. I hope that 20 years from now, if there is truly a renaissance, these debates can happen in Sanskrit. And we are not close to scholars from anywhere in the world, but they must also be willing to come and debate in Sanskrit. Okay, thank you.
Rajiv Malhotra ji wants to make some comments.
So
After that, we have some question session
yeah, we
also.
have a lot of questions. So I want to thank all the panelists and just reflect on a few things. I think Konrad Elst made a point which is mentioned very centrally in my book, and that is how Sheldon Pollock used the whole Babri Masjid episode in a very disingenuous way. He mentioned, Konrad mentioned one disingenuous aspect, well, besides throwing him out of some Indology list, but the way he interpreted and misinterpreted the whole history of Ayodhya. But beyond that, my book shows him writing, Pollock writing, projecting back 1,000 years, that the rise of Ramayana and the rise of the legend of Ram in the public, popular public, was inherently a weapon against Muslims 1,000 years ago. So it's not only misinterpreting what happened in Ayodhya, some 20 whatever years ago, but also using that as his frame to kind of interpret the whole history of Ramayana 1,000 years back. His theory is, and he's very clear on this, he writes quite a lot of times. His theory is that when the Turks were invading, say around 12th century and thereafter, Hindu kings needed a unifying grand narrative to rabble-rouse the public against these invaders. And Ramayana became the accepted narrative where the king was divine, so the Hindu kings were the divine kings like Ram, and the idea of Ravan was projected, the Rakshas was projected upon the outsiders. And this was a way this became a publicly popular grand narrative. They started building temples, which he says did not exist before. That there was no major worship of Ram, he says, and no big Rama Leela. So all this is stuff that historians of Ramayana, I want their help because I can't go back and do all this. I'm just pointing out that it seemed very strange that Ramayana has been a kind of weapon against Muslims for 1,000 years. This is a very, very strange and kind of turning Ramayana into hate speech, sort of, almost. So I'm glad he touched on this. Then Professor Rao challenged a lot of the chronology. Pollock says Valmiki comes 200-300 years after Buddha. That is the claim. And Panini also. In fact, he says that in the Jataka tales, there is a man called Ram, and that is where probably Valmiki got the idea to write this whole, blow it up and make it into Ramayana. So the Buddhist origins of Ramayana, very, very strange sort of things. Now, what Professor Jha said regarding the qualities and properties of Sanskrit, when you look at computational linguistics, which is a use of Sanskrit, I use that as one of the counter arguments against Pollock, who says that what makes it useful and made it useful was the political structures. And so I'm saying, well, today it is the computational linguistic structures that make it useful also. So practical things are being ignored because they are appropriating those and turning it into a kind of a political oppression tool, that sort of thing. The Murthy Library, which is Narayan Murthy's multi-million-dollar grant to Sheldon Pollock and his team, wants to translate 500 Indian texts. So you can imagine the built-in ideas of Aryan theory, the built-in ideas of certain words, how they're translated, the chronology, the influence of Buddhism, the clash between Buddhist and Vedic ideas, the oppressiveness, the politicization of these texts. If these are the key, the sacred, principles that have never been debated or contested until my book came out, if these are the central ideas and ideologies of the editor-in-chief, who gets to select which book will be translated, who will be the translator, he does the review, and is the final arbiter, then you have to worry that this could become worse than the Max Miller translations. He did only, 40, 50 volumes? And now we're talking about 500 volumes. So this is going to be a very big problem for us. And those Max Miller volumes were not spread out all over in Indian schools. They stayed mostly in Europe. But the plan here of the Murthy Library is to make it 100 rupee paperback and sell them all over, flood the market. This will, in 10 years, you could see the death of Sanskrit. On Sanskriti, because of the kind of flooding of the market with material that has not been looked at, reviewed by people who are the insiders of the tradition. So I'm very worried about that. And Kapilji is not here. The latest thing he told me that made me laugh, and I don't know if it was a joke or not, but he said, Vedas were written by Punjabis. He says, Punjabi asi, and he says very seriously, he says, dekho, because all this territory they were talking about, this Pakistan, Afghanistan, all this is Punjab only. So we should be very happy that we Punjabis wrote this Vedas. So I said, what you have to do is see if in the Vedas they mention Chola Bhatura. Then it will clear the That's how we have now got a project for JNU Sanskrit department to look for either Makki Roti or Chola Bhatura. Then deal is done. I really appreciate Devapriya's really catching on to this book, what it's all about. And I'm very glad that a young scholar, brilliant scholar like her, is on the case. And I'm hoping you'll be part of this home team. And I'll close by saying that the lecture tour I've been on for the last 2-3 weeks, went to Karnataka, Chennai, Tamil Nadu, Ahmedabad, Bombay before coming here yesterday. I was received very well by traditional scholars from Karnataka Sanskrit University and the leading Sanskrit university in Chennai, various Sanskrit departments run by the Swaminarayan scholars in Ramakrishna Mission and so on. And most of them, in fact, without exception, every one of them said that it is time we, the Indian traditional Sanskrit scholars, took this project, took this challenge of doing Purva Paksha and critique of Western Indologists. So if that happens, then my work will not have gone in vain, because that is all I want to happen. So now I have offers, now I have volunteers. Karnataka Sanskrit University has told me that they will set aside some of their brightest scholars. Somebody else in the same trip came up with the funding and said, I'll fund all this project, and you have money to meet and all of that kind of stuff. And similarly in Chennai, I was given commitments. So it would be wonderful if JNU wants to join this also. And people of any traditional side, I talked to the Shankaracharya of Kanchi. Both the senior and the junior Shankaracharyas were there. We spoke for a very long time. They gave me the honor of doing a television discussion, videotaped, which they normally don't. So we have a lot of footage of about 2 hours of conversation on this. And they said that they would really like to get involved in looking at, investing in Sanskrit resources to look at Western Indology. And then I got a letter from the head of the Akhada Parishad. They are the people who own the Kumbh Mela, and they said they want to start a university of Indology. They want to, but they have a lot of money, by the way. So I think if all I can do is ignite this kind of interest, that we should talk back, we should take the adhikar in our own hands. We should not outsource the adhikar of who we are, and we should in fact control this discourse. It would be fantastic. The reason I said JNU can play an important role is because you also have resources in English. You need to know English in order to read those Western Indologies. One of the things that the Sanskrit traditionalists told me is that we can't read English, we don't know English. And especially English, which has been infused with Western philosophy and thought and history, very complicated language. We don't know what they're talking about. We can read ordinary English like in a newspaper, but we do not read the English as written by Western Indologists, which is very kind of heavy and jargonized, absolutely jargonized. So all this alienates our own people from the study of ourselves. Because our traditional scholars, the best traditional scholars they brought to me in these universities, said, they said to me, if you can tell me what they are saying, I'll give you the answer. But I don't know what they're saying because I had actually employed 2-3 traditional scholars who were very highly recommended while I was writing this book, just to check things out. And I sent them soft copies of all their writings. And one guy, after 3 months, and he's a well-educated person, he writes in English and Sanskrit and Kannada, and his wife also. After 3 months, he comes and says, I have, out of the 600 pages book, I can barely understand the first 20 pages because I really don't know what they're saying. So this is where the English language resources in JNU can help understand and kind of restate it for the traditional Sanskrit people who can then give the answer. It needs to be a collaboration between multiple kinds of Indians and not just, I think that it will be very rare to find one person who knows it all to be able to give answers to these things. And the other side has been at it for a couple of 100 years and intensified it in the last few decades. So we are just starting this taking back. And therefore I hope JNU will be part of this team. Thank you very much. Yeah, start.
Sir, though I have not read your book yet, I still take the privilege of asking a few questions. While we are talking about the outsiders interpreting us and giving us information about ourselves, and that leading to a politics, a sociology which is problematic, don't you think that we at times are taking ourselves as Indians as passive beings who are being given something from above and we are taking it? Like, what about the sort of identity politics that actually existed before Macaulay came into the scene? Like, we definitely have been a very dynamic society, not a monolithic society. We had a lot of identity politics going on. So these people came with their own identity politics and that fused that with our identity politics, and then that leads to a new synthesis. And definitely there might have been a lot of active involvement from the side of the Indians. And today as well, the sort of identity politics that comes out of bashing Sanskrit promotes interests, identity interests. Why don't we talk about the Indians, the active involvement of Indians in promoting such Sanskrit bashing?
Please keep it short, please.
Yeah, please keep it short. Okay, I'll answer the question.
Sir, I have one more point.
No more point. One question per person. We have 20 people. We can come later if there's round 2. Okay, fine. So, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Ranuja Bhattacharya. I did my MA in Ancient Indian History from JNU.
Thank you. So, I'm trying to understand it. The best I can understand is why don't we focus about the identity politics that Indians have generated even before the British or even before the colonialists and even today. Yes, we should do studies of that. I mean, there are many things to study, and I'm not saying don't study them. I'm studying Western Indology because Western Indology is now taking over projects of doing 500 volumes. Western Indology is this is going to take over a large part of the school curriculum, already taken over training of our media people. All these Barkha Dutt and who's the other fellow? Sardesai. They're all from places like Columbia School of Journalism and Oxford. Most of these guys got their training there. So I'm going where the bimari is the biggest bimari. Okay. So I work backwards. As a doctor will say, what are your symptoms? Then I'll diagnose it, then I'll figure out what to do. So I am looking at the symptoms. The symptoms are this very Americanized, anglicized. I'm looking at the Jaipur Literary Festival. Who will come, who will not come. Sheldon Pollock has been celebrated 8 times. When I was there a couple of years ago, there were 3 panels full panels, not on any other person but him, funded by the Murthy family and sponsored and so on. So I'm looking at who are the most powerful people, and not, there may be many dialogues going on identity, but I'm looking at where it is the most powerful, most influential, governments giving award, billionaires giving award, and even traditional Sanskrit scholars getting bought off. So there's several, I'm told 5 or 6 faculty people in Delhi University who are on their payroll, 1 or 2 very prominent scholars of Sanskrit in Mysore. They were about to take over representing the Shingeri Mutt in the Western world at a chair controlled by President Pollock, where he would be the person deciding who gets to be on the chair. So this is spreading faster and with greater consequences. So with my limitations of how much I can do, I picked that topic. Now, what I would like to do is suggest that you pick up the topic you suggested. You please produce a book on that next year. It's easy to say to a hard-working guy, sir, you should have figured out, you're a batsman, but sir, you should have also learned to be a bowler. The point is, if I'm a mediocre batsman, maybe I should become a better batsman rather than becoming neither here nor there. So what I'm doing is what I'm positioned to do. I'm also sitting in that country, I have access to that knowledge. For 40 years, I've understood how that mind works. I'm not afraid of them, which most of the people here are. I don't need their money, they can't hire me or fire me. So just like Sri Krishna tells Arjun, your Swadharma is based on your background and your context. So my Swadharma, or to critique the American Indology, is based on my competence, my capability. I understand English, I understand their infusion of language with their philosophy because I've done all that studies. So my whole life and background qualifies me to do that. So rather than encouraging more of that, what I can do, you are asking me to stop that and do something else that I don't know anything about. That something else you should do because you're qualified.
Rajiv ji, my name is Bharat Sharma and I'm a Hindu activist. The question is that Sheldon Pollock and his nefarious designs have been very well exposed over a couple of years by you, and yet Murthy family goes and funds him. Devdutt Patnaik has been exposed by you, and yet it gets he still gets all the pride slots. So we know the Breaking India book you've mentioned, but in particular case of Narayan Murthy, is it something to do with his being on board of Ford Foundation, and is there something deeper that's not evident? Or
see, okay, that's okay. So I don't want to pick on any one person because he has a right to spend his money the way he wants. It's his money. He's made it honestly, and so he chooses to spend it this way. I mean, all I can say is whatever the motives may be, whatever the logic may be, I can analyze as a common citizen, I can analyze what I think are the consequences of funding that. How much harm, what can be done to fund it that way. Whether there are, what his life may be about in terms of what causes him to do all this, it's very hard to predict that. But certainly the globe-trotting billionaires, without picking on any one, are really into wanting to be seen as sort of the new honorary whites. Okay, sitting at this very liberal white table, academic, you fund a couple of chairs and you fund some scholars, you become this learned person, and now you are in the limelight in the United States, and the who's who in New York will felicitate you, and your picture will come, you can send it back to your village saying, now I'm sitting with the white people also. So this complex we have this kind of complex. This complex to sort of be seen as having arrived on the global stage. These are the people who have made it rich in this country. Then the next thing to do is to show that I have a very big yacht or have a very tall house in Mumbai or something like that. So maybe it is part of that complex. Maybe it is part of that kind of Americanization of the elite Indians is part of this, what these guys are doing. That's my sense of it. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I think one of the things that is not taken into account is that in America, these great universities were built by very great endowments that were made by their richest. Now, what has happened, globalization has given the sense to the Indian rich that they don't need to invest in Indian universities. It's just as easy to invest abroad, and their children can easily go there, and it's all part of this wonderful happy family that our global world is. That's why I want to sort of take this opportunity to say that it is extremely important that academics value location in research.
Yes.
The moment you produce a great work of research in an American university, whether in science or in the humanities, you are adding to the wealth of that university and that country. If our young people are not conscious of this and they think that it's all a wonderful, happy family, it is not. Intellectual property is extremely important, and therefore location is very important. So Indian universities must produce great translations,
Yes.
and for that students have to stay back and work here.
Yeah. No, this is absolutely correct. In fact, it has become the latest. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I started my foundation, I was giving grants to all these American places. I gave away all the money I could spare. Now I wish I hadn't, but I learned from it. And a lot of these people took my slides and why you should do this, that, and said, we'll help you raise funds, because I ran out of funds. And then, by then I had switched and decided that this is the wrong thing to do. We have to invest in R&D and knowledge here. So now it has, unfortunately, I've turned loose this tendency, this fashion. Now it has become a fashion out of control. Every week or so you find somebody has given so many $1 million to fund a chair here, fund a chair there. And these people are not doing due diligence. They are not doing Purva Paksh to see whom they are giving money to, who's going to occupy the chair, what is his history. And so this, one of the reasons I started writing this book is that Sringeri Mutt was in the process of setting up a whole chair for Adi Shankara studies at Columbia University to be headed by these kind of people. So, it does matter, location does matter. And when I raise this issue, why aren't you taking all these millions of dollars and creating Adi Shankara chairs around India? I was told that, Indians are not as good at scholarship. This is what I was told. So, while we can be the IT hub for the world, and while we can be a hub for making automobile parts and making pharmaceuticals and all kind of other industries, we think we cannot be the Sanskrit studies hub of the world, which is very strange. That Sanskrit studies, we think others know better, and we have become the knowledge consumers. They are the knowledge producers. We are the consumers sitting at their feet. If the camera can zoom in on this, can you please zoom in on this? Isko zoom karenge, please. This book. If you look at the cover of this book, at the bottom, big image, is Sir William Jones and the Pandits. This is a huge carving on a wall in a chapel in Oxford. And it took me a long time to go in, get all the permissions and get the picture and all the high resolution. So this is, Sir William Jones said that and at the bottom it says, he gave the Hindus their laws. Okay, so he's shown writing some laws and dictating them, and these Pandits are listening to him, and he's telling them their laws. He's telling them the Hindu laws. So now, in this book I say that today, Sheldon Pollock would be giving the Hindus their human rights. Because the whole idea of exposing human rights in Sanskrit, human rights problems, and telling them how to liberate and all that. So if one were to do a carving, if maybe the Murthy family will one day sponsor such a carving, it'll be not only Indians, but they won't be sitting on the floor, they'll be sitting on sofas drinking whiskey, and they'll be the Indian elite, anglicized Indian elite. So Sheldon Pollock will be shown as teaching the Indian elite the human rights that they lack. And then there'll be another group of Indians writing checks and thanking him with a lot of money. So this is how the story of the British has shifted to control in the United States. This is a very important point that you made. Next question.
Okay, thank you. Sir, I have two questions, two parts of a question. The first part is, I'm Akhilesh and I'm currently a student of sociology here at JNU. So the question is, now we have figured out that they're going to do a translation of more than 500 odd books, and that's something that is even a grand project that Max Miller did. So the question is, have we shaped in our minds an alternative project that would outpace their pace of translation? And if yes, what are the modalities? Have you thought out something?
Okay, so just one question each, we'll go through quick. So what is our response to this 500 volume project? First part of the response is to spread awareness. That's what this book is done. to make people aware. I don't expect the Murthy family will change their mind, but I think it is likely, it is possible that alternative funding sources will come and create another project. And in that other project, I would like not one man sitting in New York in charge of the whole thing. I would like traditional scholars, some of them from various dharma traditions, some of them from Sanskrit studies departments like JNU and various other places, and some people trained in Western idiom also.
From translation studies.
From translation studies. It should be a team of people. And before you translate even one volume, you should write down some common standards. Like for instance, are you going to support Aryan theory? What is your chronology? There should be consistency so that certain ideas, certain assumptions are clearly defined. Right now, I have no faith in what will be the assumptions on which based on which some X or Y book will be translated. That is a chaos right now which we don't need. So we need to get the funding, do some standards, and then start this project.
Sir, I'm M.C. Rao. I'm a scientist and banker, and after doing my learning and earning, I am now serving Hindu Heritage Foundation, where we teach Sanskrit to foreign students, where we also are making very sincere effort to unite Hindus and Buddhists because their DNA is resembling. What steps and what planning we have in mind so that more and more people, more and more these young students, say even my own sons and children, they study Sanskrit. I want that they must do, but what would they after that? Where will they be absorbed? What will happen to
Okay, I understand the question.
Earning not only in respect of money, but in
I understand the question, so I will answer it. So the organization I trust the most, and that is developing this kind of a strategy. First of all, there is a Sanskrit commission in HRD right now, and they're going to produce a report answering these very questions. And there is an organization called Sanskrit Bharati, which is very successfully spreading spoken Sanskrit. Some of the ideas I believe being considered are that the people who learn Sanskrit should not be put into a separate Sanskrit department only. There should be Sanskrit scholars in the maths department, there should be Ayurveda scholars in the medicine department. There should be people who know Nat Shastra and who are into the aesthetics and drama and these kind of departments, poetics and literature departments. So the various bodies of knowledge in Sanskrit should be exported to those departments. And then you have a fusion of the Sanskriti from the past and the modern today. Sanskrit becomes relevant, these people get careers, and we modernize and update our Sanskriti also. So that's rather than a ghetto, a corner where all the Sanskrit people, they live in some Sanskrit Pathshala, we have to bring them into the mainstream through various disciplines. That is the thinking.
Sure. Good evening, sir. My name is Kamal Rawat. I work as a software developer. I have been following your Yahoo group for quite a few years now. Sir, my question is that I have a daughter who is in KG right now. When she come to home, like Professor Jha mentioned, past few years have seen a trend of having a lot of cartoons on the name of our historical characters. Like Krishna is one, which is converted to cartoon. Bhim is one, which is converted to cartoon. And Hanuman is one which is converted to cartoon, and all of them are very contemporized, very westernized, not westernized in a Western sense, but westernized in very Indian sense. The way, so I see it as a digestion from your book. So
yeah, so there is also one Siya Ke Ram. Yeah, someone told me where they have Ram and Sita doing some whatever, Bollywood dance, they're doing some Bollywood dance and whatnot, So what it does is it turns itihas into myth. And once which Devdutt Patnaik is the champion and everybody eating out of his hands. So once you've turned itihas into myth, it means myth means not necessarily true, it means it can be anything. So now it is fiction and therefore you have the license to make it whatever you want. So once you've broken the itihas, then as mythology, next guy can do whatever he wants. This is what they're trying to do. They're trying to, the first strategy is to do it with respect so that you will say, "Arey wah, my Ramayana has become great, world epic bana diya hai. Hanuman ka kya bana diya hai." So first they'll do it with respect, but once it is out of the itihas genre, that once that genre is broken, then it's a free for all. This is very dangerous thing that's going on. Our people, I'm sorry to tell you that we don't, rather than being, we are so far from a solution, our people don't even know there's a problem. Most people think, "Nahi, it's very good for us." That is the dilemma we have.
When I was telling my daughter the story of Mahabharata, she said, I know him. Uska dost bhi hai, to Raju hai.
Yeah. The Ram and Sita doing disco dance. And that is the idea.
Hello everyone. So my name is Tushar Bhatia, and I want to ask, where did Sanskrit lose the ground looking back in history? I want to particularly ask this question in order to identify those mistakes which were committed by my ancestors, and eventually they became slaves.
Okay, as I said earlier, Sanskrit lost much of its ground in the colonial period actually, and then that led to the progressive closing down of many of the pathshalas and creating a fashion out of English medium education. I have a lot of documents where every small Raja or a Jamindar used to have a school where people would go and study Sanskrit. When the Britishers approached them, they said, "Hey, why are you studying this? Let's have this nice modern education." So it progressively replaced Sanskrit education with English medium education, became fashionable. And then the Rajas would now go to the Britishers and then have a whiskey and all those copying of the mannerisms, etc. And then there was power behind it. So the colonial powers they were in a control situation. So they wanted to do something and they did it because they were in a controlling situation. So I would say that was the period when actually we started losing grounds.
So they would also play polo with them, and they would get this 21-gun salute. And then their son would go and in Cambridge and have a good time.
Recently I was in Jodhpur, and then the Jodhpur, the Umaid Singh Palace, I was reading one of the incidents. So the Umaid Singh actually took the whole polo team from India on horses to London to play polo there. And you can see at the taxpayers' money and the people's money, you can indulge in such things which are completely un-Indian. So we kind of delighted ourselves in being in the company of the Westerners.
See, the strange thing is, the Aam Aadmi is given pride कि हमारा राजा, हाँ, कैसे उसको gun salute मिल गया है, हाँ? I mean, this idea of playing on our aesthetics and playing on our weakness is pride. Same thing is game going on now कि आपकी रामायण हम टीवी में लगाकर उसका ये हम कार्टून बनाकर we are going to send it all over the world. It will be the best cartoon of the year. Oscar भी मिल जाएगा. Most Indians feel very proud because there's so much self-esteem lacking, so much inferiority complex. कोई भी हमको थोड़ी सी इज्जत दे, चाहे वो थप्पड़ मार के इज्जत दे, will be very proud. मतलब आपको ये जो global theatre है, पहले उसमें आप थे ही नहीं. Now we brought you in, maybe we brought you in an inferior capacity, but at least you are in the theatre. आप stage पर तो हो ना, तो person feels very proud कि मेरे को देखो role मिल गया है. This is the problem. The solution is self-esteem. Self-esteem happens, now there is money, there is political independence, now there is also some financial, economic independence, at least for some strata of society. Now we need to decolonize the mind. We need to decolonize Indology because that decolonization will bring back the adhikar so we can reimagine ourselves. That's so important.
Hello, I'm Ramakrishnan. One of the constant themes of your writings is this idea of Purva Paksha. So I just wanted to ask you, in your research, where do you find that we have lagged, where we have started lagging behind in Purva Paksha, because of which we are in this situation today?
So there's a chapter in this book called The Death of Purva Paksha. I don't believe in the death of Sanskrit, but I believe the death of Purva Paksha. Because in the earlier times, every school of thought used to do Purva Paksha on other schools of thought, understanding it on their terms, giving a Uttar Paksha response. But somehow, when the early Christians came in the Malabar coast, there was no serious Purva Paksha of Christianity and their political structure, their economic structure, social structure. Nobody bothered to do that. At least we don't know of any. So 1,000 years later, when the Portuguese came, we really had no idea who these people are. And the Vijayanagar Empire had a vice admiral on the Malabar coast who invited Albuquerque, the Portuguese, to come and help him fight another Indian king. One king invited the Portuguese navy to help him fight the other king, not knowing who these people are, what's the grand scheme, and what will be the end game for them. Short term, he'll help you fight your enemy. Long term, he'll finish off both of you and rule over both of you. We never understood that. So this happened. Even when the Portuguese came, no Indian said, okay, now let's send anthropologists to Europe, let's send theologists to Europe, let's send historians, and let's do Purv Paksha on them in their headquarters. Like they're doing constantly studying us. And we are so proud they're studying us. They're studying us for a reason. Yeah, we never sent people over there to study them, because even in the 1600s, if we had 200 years before the British established, if we had understood the Western culture, the Western church, what they're all about, the whole project of world conquest, that how Christianity first took over one continent after another, if we had really mapped out the Purv Paksha of what they are doing, maybe when the East India Company came, maybe would have been more vigilant. Similarly with Islam, from the 7th century, 8th century Sindh, till 400-500 years later coming to Delhi. We're talking about 500 years before they reached Delhi. But we've never really done a good Purv Paksha of them. There is no big teaching about who these people are and what's their ideology and so on. Either we're very arrogant, that we are too smart, we just know too much. Even now people tell me, why are you worrying about them? Truth is in my heart, sir. This arrogance that I don't need to understand them, they're inferior people, is one problem. Another is bombastic dismissal, that this whole anger and is insulting them rather than taking them seriously. Purv Paksh requires you take your opponent seriously. You don't dismiss them, nor do you fall in love and have them in awe. You have a very equal relationship and say, okay, you are smart, you are intelligent, you're clever, I respect you, but I really want to study you, I really want to figure you out. Like a clinical doctor looking at some details of some issue. So the Purv Paksh tradition, loss of the Purv Paksh tradition is my theory of why Indian civilization went down. We were fine as long as we were able to study others, but the moment we stopped studying others, we stopped being competitive.
Hello everyone. My name is Vijay and I'm a power system engineer. I have two questions. One is when do you think, the Aryan Dravidian theory will get its final blow?
I don't know. I think the scholars are hitting at the Aryan invasion theory. And my interest is, what I'm saying is there is no Aryan party, like Dravidian party. There is no Aryan political movement, but there is Dravidian political movement. Let me just give my answer, okay? I'll come to that. So the blow has to come on the Dravidian side first. But the scholars are focusing on refuting the Aryan theory. The political power today is in political doctrines and parties that are calling themselves Dravidian. There is no Aryan party that we have to fight. So there is a disconnect from our side. The real nexus to fight is the Dravidianism. But the scholars are fighting Aryan invasion theory. So we have to shift our target. There has to be more research on the so-called Dravidian languages, their texts, what is their philosophy, what is their commonality, and if you can sort of diffuse that Dravidianism politically, then the Aryanism will also be gone. That's my approach.
But isn't it we can use it as a regional term, but not as an ethnic?
Yeah,
because even Adi Shankara actually used it as a Dravid.
But he just used it once.
As a regional term.
No, he just described the place.
Yeah, he just
if somebody asking me where do you live, I say GK2, Greater Kailash 2. But that doesn't mean that now we have a Greater Kailash 2 race and ethnicity and identity and religion and all that. So he just described it as the name of a place, an address. It was just GPS coordinates of some place some people came from, nothing more than that.
Even in Mahabharata, where we get the first reference of the Dravida, actually, it's purely regional.
Geographical, it's a space.
Yeah.
Okay, can we go on? Yeah, thank you. That's a good point.
Hello, sir. My name is Arjun. I'm a student. So you have critiqued the Abrahamic religions in your other books. One of the first critics of Abrahamic religions in modern India was Dayanand Saraswati. Does his discourse follow the tradition of Purva Paksha? How does it differ from yours? What are the comparisons between the two?
You mean Dayanand Saraswati who started the Arya Samaj? Yeah, I think he's done a good job. I just feel that we should never say somebody has done it, why are you doing it? Because first of all, 150 years ago, he did not know Marxism, postmodernism, feminism. He did not know the kind of theories today Pollock has come up with called the aestheticization of power, the whole literary and literalization theory. He didn't know those things. So the West is not static. The West has moved 150 years. So rather than saying somebody did it, we have this tendency of going back and saying, "Ye ho chuka hai ek baar." Somebody else did it. Some other person wrote this and that is done. But it is never done. You have to. The moment my book is out, I am saying already. I wish I could write a better book right now, and I could probably. So we have to always be doing a better job rather than saying "Unhone kiya tha." He did it. He did an amazing job for his time. Okay, for the 150 year ago, 175 year ago time period, he did a fantastic job. But we can't assume that the world has stayed constant. Now I call these people Charvakas 2.0, the people today that we're dealing with. They're Charvakas in the sense that they don't like Vedas, they don't like the sacred dimension, they are very good scholars in Sanskrit, don't trivialize their knowledge. Now these Charvaka 2.0 is different than the Charvaka 1.0. Okay. Now, an earlier critique of Charvakas was not applicable to Charvaka 2.0 because Charvaka 2.0 knows so many more theories. If you read the Pollock work, so many theories, Siddhanta they have come up with that were not there before. So today we have to do another Purva Paksha of the latest Charvakas. And in 20 years we'll be having Charvaka 3.0 and then Charvaka 4.0. We have to have constant vigilance of reversing the gaze on other people. Always. It's an ongoing, this is the Mahabharata. See, the Mahabharata never ended. It's not that Mahabharata tabhi hui thi. Mahabharata has been going on. If you look at recorded history, there was never a century when there was world peace. Never. Every century had major wars going on somewhere or other. So Mahabharata may shift from one place to another place. Now it's a global war going on. Okay, so it is the Mahabharata is going on, and we have a text that tells us this Mahabharata is going on. You have to be a Kshatriya, you have to do Purva Paksha on other people. Sri Krishna is always doing Purva Paksha on the other side. What are their strengths, weaknesses, what this guy can do, what that guy can do, what should be your strategy. So we have to be always doing this rather than saying ki ek baar ho gaya tha, so we don't have to do anything.
Good evening, sir. My name is Alok Shukla. I am an engineering graduate from Delhi University. So a few days back, I have a discussion on Islamic invasion on Hindu temples and desecration of them. So what he said was, it was nothing but a continuation of Shaivites and Vaishnavis fights in between them. And they also used to destroy and desecrate each other's temples. And he cited some archaeological
okay,
also.
Yeah, okay, I understand this issue very well. It's a very common left-wing critique that you cannot blame Muslims for doing what you were always doing. Now, there are many logical flaws in this. I mean, you don't say, okay, this rape is okay because somebody else also had raped somebody. One bad thing does not justify the other. Whether Shaivites and Vaishnavites did it or not is completely irrelevant to the fact that Muslims came and invaded and destroyed temples. They have to be accountable for their crime, even if somebody else has to be accountable for their crime. First. Secondly, there's a difference between an internal clash and an outsider coming. If there's a family clash, it's one thing. An outsider coming is a territorial expansion in which we lose, all of us lose. Whereas if it's an internal clash, maybe person X beats person Y, they are neighbors, and then next generation Y beats X, they are neighbors. Over a period of time, the value, the market share, and the total capital remains in the country about the same. It may get redistributed one way, then redistributed back another way. So maybe the power goes to Shaivites, the power goes to Vaishnavites, but it stays within the land. It doesn't get siphoned in thousands of camels taking loot away to the Middle East. It doesn't happen that way. But when when there is geographical expansion from one continent to the other, it is a completely different thing. Not only in the devastation of the material side of the wealth, but also ideologically a whole new framework, a whole new paradigm that originated somewhere else gets imposed on you. A whole new language gets imposed on you, and culture gets imposed on you. So the foreign invasion is of a very different kind than local kings fighting each other. That's the second point. The third point is that this business is exaggerated. This business of Shaivites and Vaishnavites, they did not have multi-generational huge armies of 20,000, 50,000 horsemen going in a big army to invade. It was a little small scale, some guy fought another guy, the way people fight anywhere. It was not something that somebody can say that there was a Shaivite kingdom invading and expanding a Shaivite dynasty for many generations on an expansion rampage, the way we have suffered from Middle East people coming. So the scale of this, the duration of this, and the intensity of this within India was nowhere compared to what we saw from foreign invaders.
Desegregation of temples was correct.
Of course. No. The desecularization of Islamic temples of India is correct. That is correct. Okay, your question is, did a Shaivite ever take over a Vaishnavite temple or a Vaishnavite? Of course, there were instances when they did that, but it was not on the same scale. And it was basically some rivalry, local rivalry, but it is different than, if it is sanctioned in your theology, it's sanctioned in your book. It is not sanctioned in the Vaishnavite books that you have to go and do this to the others. So if one guy of his own did it, then maybe 20 years later it was forgotten. It didn't sort of continue and expand over thousands of miles and hundreds of years the way the foreign invasions did. So that's the big difference, I think.
Hello sir, my name is Gitanjali and I'm working on Guru Bhakti tradition here in the Department of Sociology. And sociology, which is very close to Indology academically. In that department, we are still, asked to look into the Western theories written under Eurocentric hangover, and whenever we ask for our own theories, we are discouraged. It is said that, why do you want to study your own grandmother? So in a scenario like this, how far do you think academics can play a role in a sort of renaissance that you're talking about?
So you should ask them, why are you studying the white man's grandmother? I'm reminded of something. Morarji Desai was interviewed when he was Prime Minister. He was interviewed on CBS 60 Minutes, which is a very provocative, investigative show. Dan Rather, very dashing guy, he was interviewing him. So he asked him all the questions about his policy and all that. And there was this little sort of thing about Morarji Desai that he does this urine therapy. Yeah. So after the whole interview, towards the end, he says, I hope you don't mind. I am going to ask you a personal question. I hope you don't mind. So Morarji Desai probably expected it. So he said, yeah, go ahead. So I remember this show very well. So he says, it is said that you are part of your healing, part of your health system and so on. You drink your own urine. So Morarji Desai said, he listed 15 or 20 pharmaceutical drugs in the United States. He said, these are all made from urine. And the difference is that these people are drinking somebody else's urine. So I actually, it made an impact on me. It made an impact on me. And then a year or two later, I was in downtown one pharmacy, just buying something, and piche near the checkout counter, there was a big loud shouting going on, which in America you don't find people shouting in public, like that. Maybe nowadays in the election they do, but normally in a store they don't do that. They're sort of very quiet, well behaved. So there was a lady shouting at the counter. So when she left, and all these people were looking very nervous, in the store. When she left, I went to this fellow and I said, what happened? He said, she's very angry at us that she's been coming for so many years getting this medicine, drug. And she suddenly read this little, this thing you have to roll out and read what's in the medicine. They tell you this whole tiny print, you need magnifying glass to read what's in the medicine. They disclose it in the medicine bottle. So she finally read it, and it said that this is made from the urine of a horse. Yeah. So she's shouting and screaming at us, saying, you have been selling me horse piss all these years, and you never told me that. It's your job to have told me that. You've been selling me horse piss, and I've been having this. So the point being, you are taking the knowledge of your grandmother, and your professor, Indian professor, got an inferiority complex, and he's taking the knowledge of this white man's grandmother. The same. It is old knowledge. It is old knowledge from your tradition versus old knowledge from their tradition. You might.
Namaskar sir, I'm Sakshi Bharadwaj and I'm a student of Center for Studies of Regional Development in JNU. Sir, I wanted to thank you for, first of all, for giving me the honor of asking you a question. Sir, I come from a traditional background, and after coming to JNU, I have seen instances where the professors who are given a duty of carving responsible citizens are as assets to the country, support and suggest reading radical readers like John Skay, Pollock, and Max Muller. Some of the people who have entirely abused our culture. So how do you think this can be medicated, sir?
So I'm very happy that several students here have asked questions which are revolting against their professors. I know, I'm sorry, I have two professors here. They are the good ones, okay, they are the good ones. But I think that it is part of our culture to revolt and to be audacious. And I think it's up to students. You are the future, and they are supplying you knowledge. If it's not serving your needs, if it's not turning into good citizens and giving you a meaningful life, then you should fight back. You should write petitions. You should raise hell. You should do that. And you know, this business that, okay, they will punish you, they'll do this and that to you, you have to stand up and fight. Students in the humanities and social sciences should stand up, speak up, that a lot of the professors, what they're teaching is actually nonsense.
How you claim of being Desi when Sanskrit was never been part of the
okay, that's a question.
Aam Aadmi. That is the question. Yes.
Okay, I have.
Wait a second. So, firstly, I never claim being Desi and all that. I am doing a Purva Paksha Western Indology. I'm not telling you, I'm doing a descriptive rather than prescriptive. Aapko samajh hoga na? You understand the difference between descriptive scholarship and prescriptive. Descriptive scholarship, I'm describing this is what they're doing and this is what the tradition says instead. And prescriptive would be to say, okay, we ought to do this and we ought not to do that. This book is mainly descriptive. In the last chapter, I'm also being prescriptive. So I'm not being Desi or this or that. I'm basically, my comparison is the traditional scholars, the traditional Sanskrit scholars, insiders' view, and the outsiders' view who are Videshis, the Swadeshi and the Videshi view of Sanskrit. That is the extent of my book. Now, bigger question is, before the Sanskrit experts here, was Sanskrit a spoken language? Was it an Aam Aadmi language? I have a section here where I'm giving a lot of evidence that Sanskrit was a spoken language. It was not just an elitist language as claimed to be, but I'll let you.
Sanskrit was, having heard the whole discussion, you are going back again. This is very much. Sanskrit was very much spoken language in India. We have several differences in entire Sanskrit literature. Mahabhasha, see Mahabhasha, Patanjali. He says that if you read Mahabhasha, you will understand that. He says that, you see, Shavati word is used as a going meaning in Kambhoja. But Aryas say it is not going, just means dying. So there is a use of, he says, Shavati hi gati karma kambhojeshu. Vikara yenam arya bhashante shavayiti. So bhashante, he says. Arya speak like this. So that means very, very clearly Sanskrit was spoken language. And also he gives many other conversations. Let us think that Sanskrit was not spoken language. Pali and Prakrit were only spoken languages in ancient India. Then now my question is, you know how many poems are there in Sanskrit? Lakhs of poems are there in Sanskrit. For whom they were written? You say that nobody knows Sanskrit. For whom they were written in Sanskrit language? You see Kumar Sambhava, Raghuvamsha, and these are prominent poems, but hundreds, thousands of poems are there. All these poems were written for themselves, because poems are written for others, for society. For whom actually? And also dramas. We have very famous dramas, Abhijñā Shakuntala, Vikramoroshi, and Murchakatika. There was a movie also on Murchakatika. Utsav movie is there on the movie. Mrth Shakatika. This is very peculiar drama. You see, all dramas, the purpose was not reading. This is Drishakavyo, to enact on the stage. They used it to enact in your ancient days. For whom? If nobody understands.
It was popular culture.
It was very popular culture. And Prakrit also was spoken language. We are not denying that, because that is evident by Sanskrit dramas, because combined dialogues are there. Sanskrit also was spoken language. And this truth you will understand when you start learning Sanskrit language. As long as you are not learning Sanskrit language, you just ponder over it and just around, and you will not understand that whether it is spoken or not, and all these things. So better to start learning Sanskrit literature and entering into that. You will understand, you will find many, many evidences in that.
Also, in this book, in response to that one little section, I give examples of words and writings in Sanskrit that were not Brahmanical occupations, manual labor. Sanskrit words which only a laborer would have any understanding, only a laborer would find any useful. So obviously if words existed, it means that the people who did those jobs had use for Sanskrit. So there's lots about it. You want to say something?
Sort of the same thing, the evidence of drama must be taken into account.
Yeah.
Because the Natya Shastra says that Natya is meant for the masses. It's very clear that, the Vedas are exclusive, you need a lot of learning to access them, but Natya is for everyone. And so the evidence that there was so much theatre in Sanskrit and Prakrit, it meant that the audience at least understood it. Because this was definitely not an elite, minor activity.
Last question. This is Dr. Shilpi Tiwari. I am a kidney doctor. I have got two small questions for Dr. Jha and one for Dr. Rajiv.
Mike pass rakna thoda.
Yes. So for Dr. Jha, one thing regarding medical knowledge. How to translate some medical treatises which are there in Sanskrit so that they can be applied in research. For example, in my field, renal transplantation. The other part is that is north and south divide of language real, because we have the same letters, Vyanjan what we call. We have the R letter which is used on both the sides of the Vindhyas, and the sound is the same. So these are the two questions for you, sir. And for Professor Rajiv Malhotra ji, I would like to question that shouldn't knowledge be restricted also? Because all this is happening because the restriction of knowledge has been given, it has been, put in at a crossroad.
I'm not sure I understand. Should knowledge be restricted?
Shouldn't knowledge be restricted?
In what sense?
In the sense that it is being misused.
I don't understand. Knowledge
every society, university and country, it tries to restrict its knowledge.
No, but IT knowledge is not restricted.
Yes, but it is simple knowledge. But then here in
I'm an IT guy. It's not simple. I work very hard. What? You did medicine. Okay, medicine knowledge is restricted.
When you talk about nanoparticles in Rasayan Shastra or Viman Shastra, so there are fields which need to be restricted, which were probably followed till 200 years back.
Okay, let me rephrase. Should certain knowledge, should certain knowledge be such that only those who are qualified, like a pilot only with license can fly a plane, right? And only a nuclear scientist can go on a nuclear facility. This is a very good argument. That there are certain fields where only properly qualified people are allowed, like medicine. Everybody can't just go start doing surgery. So certain knowledge areas require only very specialized people who should have the right to practice in that knowledge area. That I agree.
It's not one of that.
Okay. No, but Sanskrit is not one of that.
Books and fields.
So maybe a particular, maybe surgery would be Sanskrit, knowledge of surgery, or where you have to be qualified to do it. But knowledge of Sanskrit as a language has not been restricted in that sense.
Okay, to answer your first question, translation is a huge problem. Translating from Sanskrit to English, we have some first-hand experience of that. We were translating Rasayan Sar into English, and there were terms like bhasma. Bhasma. How do you translate bhasma into English? We were considering metal ash or metal dust or something, and each time we would say no, this is not good. So we eventually said, okay, bhasma we retain as bhasma, because neither metal dust or metal ash approximate to what exactly bhasma is supposed to be. So these are the problems. Now experimenting these ideas alone in Sanskrit department is not possible. So we have to team up. As I said, Sanskrit is essentially multidisciplinary, because it's not only language, it is more than, it's a whole discipline, including many disciplines. So we can partner with the science departments of JNU or elsewhere. So in this case, we partner with the University of Massachusetts chemistry department, and there are two students who are exploring the nanoparticles. Now, bhasma can potentially be used as a bioenhancer. So, for example, you take medicines today, the Western medicines, 250 mg, 500 mg, now 700 mg, impact is the same, because the size of the medicine increases. So there's a lot of waste actually, a lot of residues comes out. So if you make metals, which can be used in medicines as per bhasma, purification methods and grinding method, you result in better dissolution of this material. And that is what they are exploring. And these two students have gotten very good results. They are about to graduate. I'm sure we have applied for some patent, as Balram Singh and all. He has set up his own institute. So we are going to get some very good results. That's one question. The second question.
I think I know a little bit about it, sorry for interrupting. This could be actually a very big breakthrough for Sanskrit traditional knowledge being applied to nanotechnology today with amazing applications. This would be a very big thing, that he actually is a co-discoverer with Balram Singh, both of them working together. It's quite an important project.
Now the second question is very interesting. The Dravid and Indo-Aryan languages, traditionally the linguists have divided us into 4 language families, Indo-Aryan, Dravidian being the majority, constituting 96% of Indian speakers. And then we have Austroasiatic and Tibeto-Burma, not more than 2% or something. Now the Dravidian family is very interesting actually. If you compare the Indo-Aryan languages properties and Dravidian properties, there are many overlaps actually. We realize that more when we start building technologies for them. We realize there's a lot of overlap across already. Now, so that makes me wonder. I have recorded that in one of the papers that we came up with Angela Marcantonio in a book called Perspectives on the Origin of Indian Civilization. Genetically, there is no difference. So linguistically also, is there more homogeneous behavior between the two families than really as perceived in the linguistics domain? So my hunch is that maybe there was some Indic family, a Proto-Indic family, which split right across into the north and the south because of the Vindhyas geographically dividing us. So maybe the Indic family is split into 2 families, and then the North Indian Indic gave rise to the North Indian Aryan languages, and South Indian Indic gave rise to the 4 Dravidian languages. So to me, that is the possible theory, instead of having the Proto-Indo-European coming to India and all that nonsense. Now, if you study one of the works by Emino, an eminent American linguist who studied 25 years in South India, worked on all Dravidian languages, he has to note in one of his very premier articles, India as a linguistic area, he says that despite being so many language families perceptibly, India behaves like a common linguistic area. So even if you go by Emino's remark in his very famous paper, it looks like India has been behaving because of this so much of mixing, so much of traveling across and so much of acculturation, looks like a single common family. And that should probably modern India should promote than the divisive nature of things, which is more political than anything real, actually.
One more question, final question. You want to say something?
Yes, of course.
Get a mic.
I don't want to go into my disagreements with Professor Jha. However, the commonalities between all the Indian languages, also the Munda languages, is very largely due precisely to the influence of Sanskrit upon the vernaculars. And in this respect, I would like to say something to an earlier question. You see, many parents fear that their children are wasting their time by learning Sanskrit. Now, even if Sanskrit does not become the Rashtra Bhasha or something, as 49% of the Constituent Assembly wanted, still it is useful to learn Sanskrit. In Australia, they are reintroducing Latin, which is more or less the same thing in European languages as Sanskrit is for Indian languages. Now, you see, earlier it was phased out because it was deemed useless. Now, they did a test. You see, one group of pupils was given English for 8 hours. Another group was given 4 hours of English, 4 hours of Latin. Now, that second group, at the end of the course, did not only know Latin while the others did not, they also knew English better. And so, similarly, learning Sanskrit is simply very useful for your Hindi or whichever language.
Good. Yeah, my view is that we should Sanskritize English. We should take non-translatables. we should take Sanskrit non-translatables. In my book, Being Different, I've got the whole chapter called Sanskrit non-translatables. These are words which have no dharma, and I explain why Atman cannot be translated as soul. I have a whole lot of these. Actually, there's 1,000 of them. But I would like to write a little book on 108 Sanskrit non-translatables and make it a policy, or recommend a policy that everyone, even their normal language is English, these 108 words they should not translate and they should use the Sanskrit, and then you Sanskritize English. Then after you've done 108, then you do 208. You just keep adding more Sanskrit words into English, and you don't have to teach people Sanskrit. You just tell them you can speak English, but these 108 words you must learn what they mean, why the English equivalent is not good enough. It is not the same thing, and that Sanskritizes English.
Rajiv, there was a question which I feel is incomplete, the answer. So if I have your permission, I can complete that answer. Why Purva Paksh died, why Sanskrit learning died. So if I have your permission, I'll answer that question.
Go ahead.
I've been working in a village, my ancestral town, for the last 2.5 years, and I discovered that it was called Chota Kashi, because within 3 kilometers...
Why don't you stand here, let the camera get you? So you are explaining about the importance of Purva Paksh.
No, somebody asked why
it died.
The learning of Sanskrit died.
Okay.
I think a lot of us don't visit our ancestral villages. If we were to go back to our villages, we would understand that Sanskrit still survives there in many ways. So what I discovered was that 150 years ago, there were 8 centers of Sanskrit learning in that little town within 3 kilometers. And that was because it was nurtured by the Seths, which were my ancestors, and all learning was funded. So the question of how do we earn out of learning Sanskrit did not arise because people understood that that was our civilization. We had great texts of all kinds of disciplines. So it was all funded, and people who taught in Sanskrit, learned Sanskrit, didn't have to worry about how they would make their living. It was nurtured. And I think the time has come again where we treat Sanskrit not as a language but as a civilization and nurture it. Also, since nobody has spoken in Sanskrit, I'd just like to comment on what Rajiv is doing as a friend in Sanskrit. So I'm just remembering a shloka from the Upanishad, from the Ish Upanishad. Hiranmaye nispatrena satyasya pihitam mukham tattvam poshan apavrinu satya dharmaya drishtaye. So the face of truth is covered with a golden lid, which is the Western glitter. Tattvam poshan apavrinu satya dharmaya drishtaye. So we request the nurturer, in this case Rajiv, to remove that golden lid and let us have a glimpse of the truth. And thank you, Rajiv, for
You're done? Since the madam said that nobody spoke, normally I speak in Sanskrit. But I thought that there are many other people who may not understand, but I say something Lotus Tang because there is a formal Lotus Tang. Aham adya बहुदूरात् आगतेभ्यः अतिथिवर्येभ्यः भूयो भूयः अहं धन्यवादान् व्याहरामि भवद्भ्यः सर्वेभ्यः विभिन्नप्रान्तेभ्यः समागतेभ्यः छात्रेभ्यः अध्यापकेभ्यः सर्वेभ्यः भूयो भूयः धन्यवादान् व्याहरामि अद्य महदिदं सुदिनं यत् वयं संस्कृतविषये चर्चां कृतवन्तः जवाहरलाल् नेहरू विश्वविद्यालये सामान्यरूपेण अस्माकं विभागे वयं सर्वदा चर्चां कुर्मः परन्तु इदानीं बहिरागत्य संस्कृतं बहिरागच्छति विभागात् इति महान् सन्तोषः तदर्थं भवद्भ्यः भूयो भूयः धन्यवादः तत्र प्रधानरूपेण राजीव मल्होत्रा महोदयेभ्यः यतोहि येषां कारणेन वयम् अत्र सर्वेपि अत्र अद्य उपस्थिताः अस्यां सभायां तदर्थं महान् आनन्दः so like this having shown how we speak in Sanskrit, now I will come again to English. And I'm very happy for this question session because questioning, you know, is very, very important element in Sanskrit literature. You must know this. This is very, nobody actually pointed out so far. Even actually, I think Rajiv ji also could not say that. But Sanskrit literature is full of questioning this empowerment. And these questions are very important in Sanskrit because there are
Very important point.
very important actually. See, if there is no question, there is no science. Therefore, we say that there was so much science because of this questioning, the tendency of our ancient scholars. You know that there is among the Upanishads, there is one Prashnopanishad. The name itself is Prashnopanishad. All questions are there in Prashnopanishad and answers also. And you know, in Mahabharata, very famous is Yaksha Prashnas. Yaksha puts Prashnas, questions to Yudhishthira, and he gives answers. So in that way, I am very happy for this question session. So many people very nicely, and those who have asked very good questions, for them I extend my thanks. Because of them only we will progress further and we find the solutions. I thank everybody for their presence and thank Rajiv.